The Two Drovers. It was the day after Dawn Fair when my story commences. It had been a brisk market. Several dealers had attended from the northern and midland counties in England, and English money had flown so merrily about as to gladden the hearts of the Highland farmers. Many large droves were about to set off for England, under the protection of their owners, or of the topsmen whom they employed in the tedious, laborious, and responsible office of driving the cattle for many hundred miles, from the market where they had been purchased to the fields or farmyards where they were to be fattened for the shambles. The Highlanders in particular are masters of this difficult trade of driving, which seems to suit them as well as the trade of war. It affords exercise for all their habits of patient endurance and active exertion. They are required to know perfectly the drove roads, which lie over the wildest tracts of the country, and to avoid as much as possible the highways, which distress the feet of the bullocks, and the turnpikes, which annoy the spirit of the drover. Whereas on the broad green or grey track which leads across the pathless moor, the herd not only move at ease and without taxation, but, if they mind their business, may pick up a mouthful of food by the way. At night, the drovers usually sleep along with their cattle, let the weather be what it will, and many of these hardy men do not once rest under a roof during a journey on foot from Lochaber to Lincolnshire. They are paid very highly, for the trust reposed is of the last importance, as it depends on their prudence, vigilance, and honesty. Whether the cattle reach the final market in good order and afford a profit to the grazier. But as they maintain themselves at their own expense, they are especially economical in that particular. At the period we speak of, a Highland drover was victualled for his long and toilsome journey with a few handfuls of oatmeal and 2 or 3 onions, renewed from time to time, and a ram's horn filled with whisky, which he used regularly but sparingly every night and morning. His dirk, or skene-do, i.e., black knife, so worn as to be concealed beneath the arm or by the folds of the plaid, was his only weapon, excepting the cudgel with which he directed the movements of the cattle. A Highlander was never so happy as on these occasions. There was a variety in the whole journey which exercised the Celt's natural curiosity and love of motion. There were the constant change of place and scene, the petty adventures incidental to the traffic, and the intercourse with the various farmers, graziers, and traders, intermingled with occasional merrymakings. Not the less acceptable to Donald that they were void of expense, and there was the consciousness of superior skill, for the Highlander, a child amongst flocks, is a prince amongst herds, and his natural habits induce him to disdain the shepherd's slothful life, so that he feels himself nowhere more at home than when following a gallant drove of his country cattle in the character of their guardian. Of the number who left Dune in the morning, and with the purpose we have described, not a Glunamai of them all cocked his bonnet more briskly, or gartered his tartan hose under knee over a pair of more promising Spig's legs, than did Robin Oig Maccombich, called familiarly Robin Oig, that is, young, or the lesser Robin. Though small of stature, as the epithet Oig implies, and not very strongly limbed, he was as light and alert as one of the deer of his mountains. He had an elasticity of step which, in the course of a long march, made many a stout fellow envy him, and the manner in which he busked his plaid and adjusted his bonnet argued a consciousness that so smart a John Highlandman as himself would not pass unnoticed among the lowland lasses. The ruddy cheek, red lips, and white teeth set off a countenance which had gained by exposure to the weather a healthful and hardy rather than a rugged hue. If Robin Oig did not laugh, or even smile frequently, as indeed is not the practice among his countrymen, His bright eyes usually gleamed from under his bonnet with an expression of cheerfulness ready to be turned into mirth. The departure of Robin Oig was an incident in the little town, in and near which he had many friends, male and female. He was a topping person in his way, transacted considerable business on his own behalf, and was entrusted by the best farmers in the Highlands, in preference to any other drover in that district. He might have increased his business to any extent had he condescended to manage it by deputy. But, except a lad or two, sisters' sons of his own, Robin rejected the idea of assistance, conscious, perhaps, how much his reputation depended upon his attending in person to the practical discharge of his duty in every instance. He remained, therefore, contented with the highest premium given to persons of his description, and comforted himself with the hopes that a few journeys to England might enable him to conduct business on his own account in a manner becoming his birth. For Robin Oig's father, Lachlan Maccombich, or son of my friend, his actual clan surname being MacGregor, had been so called by the celebrated Rob Roy because of the particular friendship which had subsisted between the grandsire of Robin and that renowned Cateran. Some people even say that Robin Oig derived his Christian name from one as renowned in the wilds of Loch Lomond as Errol was his namesake, Robin Hood, in the precincts of merry Sherwood. Of such ancestry, as James Boswell says, who would not be proud? Robin Oig was proud accordingly, but his frequent visits to England and to the Lowlands had given him tact enough to know that pretensions which still gave him a little right to distinction in his own lonely glen might be both obnoxious and ridiculous if preferred elsewhere. The pride of birth, therefore, was like the miser's treasure, the secret subject of his contemplation, but never exhibited to strangers as a subject of boasting. Many were the words of gratulation and good luck which were bestowed on Robin Oig. The judges commended his drove, especially Robin's own property, which were the best of them. Some thrust out their snuff-mulls for the parting pinch, others tendered the doch and daroch, or parting cup, or cried, "Good luck, travel out with you and come home with you. Give you luck in the Saxon market, brave notes in the Lebhardu black pocket-book, and plenty of English fold in the sporran." Pouch of goatskin. The bonny lassies made their adieus more modestly, and more than one, it was said, would have given her best brooch to be certain that it was upon her that his eye last rested as he turned towards the road. Robin Oig had just given the preliminary hoo-hoo to urge forward the loiterers of the drove, when there was a cry behind him. "Stay!" Robin bade a blink. "Here is Janet of Tomahurich, old Janet, your father's sister." "Plague on her for an old Highland witch and spaewife," said a farmer from the Carsay of Stirling. "She'll cast some of her cantrips on the cattle." "She canna do that," said another sapient of the same profession. "Robin Oig is no the lad to leave any of them without tying St. Mungo's knot on their tails, and that will put to her speed the best witch that ever flew over Demayet upon a broomstick." It may not be indifferent to the reader to know that the Highland cattle are peculiarly liable to be taken or infected by spells and witchcraft, which judicious people guard against by knitting knots of peculiar complexity on the tuft of hair which terminates the animal's tail. But the old woman who was the object of the farmer's suspicion seemed only busied about the drover, without paying any attention to the drove. Robin, on the contrary, appeared rather impatient of her presence. "What old-world fancy," he said, "has brought you so early from the Ingleside this morning, Mahomie? I am sure I bid you good, even, and had your God speed last night, and left me more siller than the useless old woman will use till you come back again, bird of my bosom," said the Sibyl. "But it is little I would care for the food that nourishes me, or the fire that warms me, or for God's blessed sun itself. if aught but weal should happen to the grandson of my father. So let me walk the diesel round you, that you may go safe out into the far foreign land, and come safe home." Robin Oig stopped, half embarrassed, half laughing, and signing to those around that he only complied with the old woman to soothe her humour. In the meantime, she traced around him, with wavering steps, the propitiation, which some have thought has been derived from the Druidical mythology. It consists, as is well known, in a person who makes the diesel walking 3 times round the person who is the object of the ceremony, taking care to move according to the course of the sun. At once, however, she stopped short, and exclaimed in a voice of alarm and horror, "Grandson of my father, there is blood on your hand." "Hush, for God's sake, aunt," said Robin Oig. "You will bring more trouble on yourself with this Taish Tarag second sight than you will be able to get out of for many a day." The old woman only repeated, with a ghastly look, "There is blood on your hand, and it is English blood. The blood of the Gael is richer and redder. Let us see. Let us Robin Oig could prevent her, which indeed could only have been by positive violence, so hasty and peremptory were her proceedings. She had drawn from his side the dirk which lodged in the folds of his plaid, and held it up, exclaiming, although the weapon gleamed clear and bright in the sun, "Blood! Blood, Saxon blood again. Robin Oig Maccombich, go not this day to England." "Prut, trut," answered Robin Oig, "that will never do neither. It would be next thing to running the country." "For shame, Mahummy, give me the dirk. You cannot tell by the colour the difference betwixt the blood of a black bullock and a white one. And you speak of knowing Saxon from Gaelic blood. All men have their blood from Adam, Mummy. Give me my skein, Duch, and let me go on my road. I should have been halfway to Stirling Brig by this time. Give me my dirk, and let me go." "Never will I give it to you," said the old woman. "Neither will I quit my hold on your plaid, unless you promise me not to wear that unhappy weapon." The women around him urged him also. Saying few of his aunt's words fell to the ground, and as the lowland farmers continued to look moodily on the scene, Robin Oig determined to close it at any sacrifice. "Well, then," said the young drover, giving the scabbard of the weapon to Hugh Morrison, "you Lowlanders care nothing for these freats. Keep my dirk for me. I cannot give it you, because it was my father's, but your drove follows ours, and I am content it should be in your keeping, not in mine. Will this do, Mummy?" "It must," said the old woman. "That is, if the Lowlander is mad enough to carry the knife." The strong Westlandman laughed aloud. "Good wife," said he, "I am Hugh Morrison from Glenea, come of the manly Morrisons of old Langsyne, that never took short weapon against a man in their lives. And neither needed they. They had their broadswords, and I have this bit supple," showing a formidable cudgel, "for dirking o'er the board. I leave that to John Highlandman. Ye needna snort, none of you Highlanders, and you in especial, Robin. I'll keep the bit knife if you are feared for the old spaewife's tale, and give it back to you whenever you want it." Robin was not particularly pleased with some part of Hugh Morrison's speech, but he had learned in his travels more patience than belonged to his Highland constitution originally, and he accepted the service of the descendant of the manly Morrisons without finding fault with the rather depreciating manner in which it was offered. If he had not had his mourning in his head, and been but a Dumfriesshire hog into the boot, he would have spoken more like a gentleman. But you cannot have more of a sow than a grumph. It's shame my father's knife should ever slash a haggis for the like of him. Thus saying, but saying it in Gaelic, Robin drove on his cattle and waved farewell to all behind him. He was in the greater haste, because he expected to join at Falkirk a comrade and brother in profession with whom he proposed to travel in company. Robin Oig's chosen friend was a young Englishman, Harry Wakefield by name, well known at every northern market, and in his way as much famed and honoured as our Highland driver of bullocks. He was nearly 6 feet high, gallantly formed to keep the rounds at Strathfield or maintain the ring at a wrestling match, and although he might have been overmatched perhaps among the regular professors of the fancy, yet as a yokel or rustic or a chance customer, he was able to give a bellyful to any amateur of the pugilistic art. Doncaster races saw him in his glory, betting his guinea, and generally successfully, nor was there a main fought in Yorkshire, the feeders being persons of celebrity, at which he was not to be seen if business permitted. But though a sprack lad, and fond of pleasure and its haunts, Harry Wakefield was steady, and not the cautious Robin Oig Maccombich himself was more attentive to the main chance. His holidays were holidays indeed, but his days of work were dedicated to steady and persevering labour. In countenance and temper, Wakefield was the model of old England's merry yeoman, whose cloth-yard shafts, in so many hundred battles, asserted her superiority over the nations, and whose good sabres in our own time are her cheapest and most assured defence. His mirth was readily excited, for, strong in limb and constitution, and fortunate in circumstances, he was disposed to be pleased with everything about him, and such difficulties as he might occasionally encounter were, to a man of his energy, rather matter of amusement than serious annoyance. With all the merits of a sanguine temper, our young English drover was not without his defects. He was irascible, sometimes to the verge of being quarrelsome, and perhaps not the less inclined to bring his disputes to a pugilistic decision, because he found few antagonists able to stand up to him in the boxing ring. It is difficult to say how Harry Wakefield and Robin Oig first became intimates, but it is certain a close acquaintance had taken place betwixt them, although they had apparently few common subjects of conversation or of interest so soon as their talk ceased to be of bullocks. Robin Oig, indeed, spoke the English language rather imperfectly upon any other topics but stots and kylos, and Harry Wakefield could never bring his broad Yorkshire tongue to utter a single word of Gaelic. It was in vain. Robin spent a whole morning, during a walk over Minch Moor, in attempting to teach his companion to utter, with true precision, the shibboleth "Ear Hoo," which is the Gaelic for a calf. From Traquair to Murder Cairn, the hill rung with the discordant attempts of the Saxon upon the unmanageable monosyllable, and the heartfelt laugh which followed every failure. They had, however, better modes of awakening the echoes, for Wakefield could sing many a ditty to the praise of Moll, Susan, and Cicely, and Robin Oig had a particular gift at whistling interminable pibrochs through all their involutions, and, what was more agreeable to his companion's southern ear, knew many of the northern airs, both lively and pathetic, to which Wakefield learned to pipe a bass. Thus, though Robin could hardly have comprehended his companion's stories about horse racing and cockfighting or fox hunting, and although his own legends of clan fights and criegs, varied with talk of Highland goblins and fairy folk, would have been caviare to his companion, they contrived nevertheless to find a degree of pleasure in each other's company, which had for 3 years back induced them to join company and travel together, when the direction of their journey permitted. Each, indeed, found his advantage in this companionship, for where could the Englishman have found a guide through the Western Highlands like Robin Oig Maccombich? And when they were on what Harry called the right side of the border, his patronage, which was extensive, and his purse, which was heavy, were at all times at the service of his Highland friend, and on many occasions his liberality did him genuine yeoman's service. Chapter 2. were ever two such loving friends. How could they disagree? Oh, thus it was, he loved him dear, and thought how to requite him. And having no friend left but he did resolve to fight him. Duke upon duke. The pair of friends had traversed with their usual cordiality the grassy wilds of Liddesdale, and crossed the opposite part of Cumberland, emphatically called the Waste. In these solitary regions, the cattle under the charge of our drovers derived their subsistence chiefly by picking their food as they went along the drove road, or sometimes by the tempting opportunity of a start and hour loop, or invasion of the neighbouring pasture, where an occasion presented itself. But now the scene changed before them. They were descending towards a fertile and enclosed country, where no such liberties could be taken with impunity, or without a previous arrangement and bargain with the possessors of the ground. This was more especially the case, as a great northern fair was upon the eve of taking place, where both the Scotch and English drover expected to dispose of a part of their cattle which it was desirable to produce in the market, rested and in good order. Fields were therefore difficult to be obtained, and only upon high terms. This necessity occasioned a temporary separation betwixt the two friends, who went to bargain, each as he could, for the separate accommodation of his herd. Unhappily, it chanced that both of them, unknown to each other, thought of bargaining for the ground they wanted on the property of a country gentleman of some fortune, whose estate lay in the neighbourhood. The English drover applied to the bailiff on the property, who was known to him. It chanced that the Cumbrian squire, who had entertained some suspicions of his manager's honesty, was taking occasional measures to ascertain how far they were well-founded, and had desired that any inquiries about his enclosures, with a view to occupy them for a temporary purpose, should be referred to himself. As, however, Mr. Ireby had gone the day before upon a journey of some miles' distance to the northward, the bailiff chose to consider the check upon his full powers as for the time removed, and concluded that he should best consult his master's interest, and perhaps his own, in making an agreement with Harry Wakefield. Meanwhile, ignorant of what his comrade was doing, Robin Oig, on his side, chanced to be overtaken by a good-looking, smart little man upon a pony, most knowingly hobbed and cropped, as was then the fashion, the rider wearing tight leather breeches and long-necked bright spurs. This cavalier asked one or two pertinent questions about markets and the price of stock. So Robin, seeing him a well-judging, civil gentleman, took the freedom to ask him whether he could let him know if there was any grass-land to be let in that neighbourhood, for the temporary accommodation of his drove. He could not have put the question to more willing ears. The gentleman of the buckskins was the proprietor with whose bailiff Harry Wakefield had dealt, or was in the act of dealing. "Thou art in good luck, my canny Scot," said Mr. Ireby, "to have spoken to me, for I see thy cattle have done their day's work, and I have at my disposal the only field within 3 miles that is to be let in these parts. The drove can be gang 2, 3, 4 miles, very pretty weel indeed," said the cautious Highlander, "but what would his honour be axing for the beasts be the head, if she was to take the park for 2 frae or 3 days? We won't differ, Sawney, if you let me have 6 stots for winterers in the way of reason. And which beasts wad your honour be for having?" "Why, let me see the 2 black, the dun one yon doddy him with the twisted horn, the brocket. How much by the head?" "Ah," said Robin, "your honour is a shudge, a real shudge. I couldna have set off the pest. 6 beasts petter mysel. Me, that kenned them as if they were my parents, poor things." "Well, how much per head, Sawney?" continued Mr. Ireby. "It was high markets at Dooney and Falkirk," answered Robin, and thus the conversation proceeded, until they had agreed on the prix-juste for the bullocks, the squire throwing in the temporary accommodation of the enclosure for the cattle into the boot, and Robin making, as he thought, a very good bargain, provided the grass was but tolerable. The squire walked his pony alongside of the drove, partly to show him the way, and see him put into possession of the field, and partly to learn the latest news of the northern markets. They arrived at the field, and the pasture seemed excellent. But what was their surprise when they saw the bailiff quietly inducting the cattle of Harry Wakefield into the grassy Goshen, which had just been assigned to those of Robin Oig Maccombich. By the proprietor himself! Squire Ebbe set spurs to his horse, dashed up to his servant, and learning what had passed between the parties, briefly informed the English drover that his bailiff had let the ground without his authority, and that he might seek grass for his cattle wherever he would, since he was to get none there. At the same time he rebuked his servant severely for having transgressed his commands, and ordered him instantly to assist in ejecting the hungry and weary cattle of Harry Wakefield, which were just beginning to enjoy a meal of unusual plenty, and to introduce those of his comrade, whom the English drover now began to consider as a rival. The feelings which arose in Wakefield's mind would have induced him to resist Mr. Stist, Ireby's decision, but every Englishman has a tolerably accurate sense of law and justice, and John Fleecepumpkin, the bailiff, having acknowledged that he had exceeded his commission, Wakefield saw nothing else for it than to collect his hungry and disappointed charge, and drive them on to seek quarters elsewhere. Robin Oig saw what had happened with regret, and hastened to offer to his English friend to share with him the disputed possession. But Wakefield's pride was severely hurt, and he answered disdainfully, "Take it all, man, take it all. Never make 2 bites of a cherry. Thou canst talk over the gentry, and blear a plain man's eye. Out upon you, man. I would not kiss any man's dirty latchets for leave to bake in his oven." Robin Oig, sorry but not surprised at his comrade's displeasure, hastened to entreat his friend to wait but an hour till he had gone to the squire's house to receive payment for the cattle he had sold, and he would come back and help him to drive the cattle into some convenient place of rest, and explain to him the whole mistake they had both of them fallen into. But the Englishman continued indignant. "Thou hast been selling, hast thou? Aye, aye. Thou is a cunning lad for kenning the hours of bargaining. Go to the devil with thyself, for I will ne'er see thy fore's loon's visage again. Thou should be ashamed to look me in the face." "I am ashamed to look no man in the face," said Robin Oig, something moved, "and, moreover, I will look you in the face this blessed day, if you will bide at the Clachan down yonder." "Mayhap you had as well keep away," said his comrade, and turning his back on his former friend, he collected his unwilling associates, assisted by the bailiff, who took some real and some affected interest in seeing Wakefield accommodated. After spending some time in negotiating with more than one of the neighbouring farmers, who could not, or would not, afford the accommodation desired, Henry Wakefield at last, and in his necessity, accomplished his point by means of the landlord of the alehouse at which Robin Oig and he had agreed to pass the night when they first separated from each other. Mine host was content to let him turn his cattle on a piece of barren moor, at a price little less than the bailiff had asked for the disputed enclosure, and the wretchedness of the pasture, as well as the price paid for it, was set down as exaggerations of the breach of faith and friendship of his Scottish crony. This turn of Wakefield's passions was encouraged by the bailiff, who had his own reasons for being offended against poor Robin, as having been the unwitting cause of his falling into disgrace with his master, as well as by the innkeeper, and 2 or 3 chance guests, who stimulated the drover in his resentment against his quondam associate, some from the ancient grudge against the Scots, which, when it exists anywhere, is to be found lurking in the border counties, and some from the general love of mischief which characterizes mankind in all ranks of life. To the honor of Adam's children be it spoken. Good. John Barleycorn also, who always heightens and exaggerates the prevailing passions, be they angry or kindly, was not wanting in his offices on this occasion, and confusion to false friends and hard masters was pledged in more than one tankard. In the meanwhile, Mr. Ireby found some amusement in detaining the northern drover at his ancient hall. He caused a cold round of beef to be placed before the Scot in the butler's pantry, together with a foaming tankard of home brewed, and took pleasure in seeing the hearty appetite with which these unwonted edibles were discussed by Robin Oig M'Combich. The squire himself, lighting his pipe, compounded between his patrician dignity and his love of agricultural gossip by walking up and down while he conversed with his guest. "I passed another drove," said the squire, "with one of your countrymen behind them. They were something less beasts than your drove. Doddies, most of them. A big man was with them. None of your kilts, though, but a decent pair of breeches. Do you know who he may be?" "Hout aye, that might, could, and would be Hughie Morrison. I didna think he could have been sack-wheel up. He has made a day on us, but his Argyllishers will have wearied shanks. How far was he behind?" "I think about 6 or 7 miles," answered the squire, "for I passed them at the Christenbury Crag, and I overtook you at the Holland Bush. If his beasts be leg-weary, he will be maybe selling bargains." Na, Hughie Morrison is no the man for bargains, ye maun. Come to some Highland body like Robin Oig herself for the like of these. Put, he maun be wishing you good night, and 20 of them let Alanay an, and I maun down to the Clashen to see if the lad Harry Waakfelt is out of his humdudgeons yet. The party at the alehouse was still in full talk, and the treachery of Robin Oig still the theme of conversation, when the supposed culprit entered the apartment. His arrival, as usually happens in such a case, put an instant stop to the discussion of which he had furnished the subject, and he was received by the company assembled with that chilling silence which, more than 1,000 exclamations, tells an intruder that he is unwelcome. Surprised and offended, but not appalled, by the reception which he experienced, Robin entered with an undaunted and even a haughty air, attempted no greeting, as he saw he was received with none, and placed himself by the side of the fire, a little apart from a table at which Harry Wakefield, the bailiff, and 2 or 3 other persons were seated. The ample Cumbrian kitchen would have afforded plenty of room, even for a larger separation. Robin, thus seated, proceeded to light his pipe and call for a pint of 2-penny. "We have no 2-pence ale," answered Ralph Heskett, the landlord, "but as thou find'st thy own tobacco, it's like thou mayst find thy own liquor too. It's the want of thy country, I wot." "Shame, goodman," said the landlady, a blithe, bustling housewife, hastening herself to supply the guest with liquor. "Thou knowest well enow what the strange man wants, and it's thy trade to be civil, man. Thou shouldst know that if the Scot likes a small pot, he pays a sure penny." Without taking any notice of this nuptial dialogue, the Highlander took the flagon in his hand, and addressing the company generally, drank the interesting toast of "good markets" to the party assembled. "The better that the wind blew, fewer dealers from the north," said one of the farmers, "and fewer Highland runts to eat up the English meadows." "Soul of my pody, put you are wrang there, my friend," answered Robin with composure. "It is your fat Englishmen that eat up our Scots cattle, puir things." "I wish there was a summit to eat up their drovers," said another. "A plain Englishman canna make bread with a kenning of them, or an honest servant keep his master's favour, but they will come sliding in between him and the sunshine. said the bailiff. If these be jokes, said Robin Oig, with the same composure, there is our money jokes upon one man. It is no joke, but downright earnest, said the bailiff. Harkye, Mr. Robin Og, or whatever is your name, it's right we should tell you that we are all of one opinion, and that is that you, Mr. Robin Og, have behaved to our friend Mr. Harry Wakefield here, like a raff and a blackguard. Nay doubt, answered Robin with great composure, and you are a set of very pretty judges, for whose prains or behaviour I wad not gie a pinch of sneeshing. If Mr. Harry Wakefield kens where he is wranged, he kens where he may be righted. He speaks truth, said Wakefield, who had listened to what passed, divided between the offence which he had taken at Robin's late behaviour and the revival of his habitual feelings of regard. He now rose and went towards Robin, who got up from his seat as he approached, and held out his hand. "That's right, Harry. Go it serve him out," resounded on all sides. "Tip him, the nailer show him the mill." "Hold your peace, all of you, and be," said Wakefield. And then addressing his comrade, he took him by the extended hand with something alike of respect and defiance. "Robin," he said, "thou hast used me ill enough this day. But if you mean, like a frank fellow, to shake hands and take a tussle for love on the sod, why, I'll forgive thee, man, and we shall be better friends than ever." "And would it no be better to be good friends without more of the matter?" said Robin. "We will be much better friendships with our pains hailed and broken." Harry Wakefield dropped the hand of his friend, or rather threw it from him. "I did not think I had been keeping company for 3 years with a coward." "Coward belongs to none of my name," said Robin, whose eyes began to kindle, but keeping the command of his temper. "It was no coward's legs or hands, Harry Wakefield, that drew you out of the fords of Frew, when you was drifting o'er the Black Rock, and every eel in the river expected his share of you." "And that is true enough too," said the Englishman, struck by the appeal. "Adzooks!" exclaimed the bailiff. "Sure Harry Wakefield, the nattiest lad at Whitsun Triste, Wooler Fair, Carlisle Sands, or Stagshaw Bank, is not going to show white feather. Ah, this comes of living so long with kilts and bonnets. Men forget the use of their daddies." "I may teach you, Master Fleecebumpkin, that I have not lost the use of mine," said Wakefield, and then went on. "This will never do, Robin. We must have a turn-up, or we shall be the talk of the countryside. I'll be D.D. if I hurt thee. I'll put on the gloves gin thou like. Come, stand forward like a man." "To be beaten like a dog," said Robin. "Is there any reason in that? If you think I have done you wrong, I'll go before your judge, though I neither know his law nor his language." A general cry of "No, no, 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 lawyer, no, lawyer," a bellyful and befriends, was echoed by the bystanders. "But," continued Robin, "if I am to fight, I have no skill to fight like a jackanapes, with hands and nails." "How would you fight then?" said his antagonist, "though I am thinking it would be hard to bring you to the scratch anyhow." "I would fight with broadswords and sink point on the first blood drawn like a gentleman's." A loud shout of laughter followed the proposal, which indeed had rather escaped from poor Robin's swelling heart than been the dictate of his sober judgment. "Gentlemen, quotha!" was echoed on all sides, with a shout of unextinguishable laughter. "A very pretty gentleman, God wot! Canst get 2 swords for the gentleman to fight with, Ralph Heskett? No, but I can send to the armoury at Carlisle and lend them 2 forks to be making shift with in the meantime." "Tush, man," said another, "the bonny Scots come into the world with the blue bonnet on their heads and dirk and pistol at their belt." "Best send post," said Mr. Fleecebumpkin, "to the Squire of Corby Castle to come and stand second to the gentleman." In the midst of this torrent of general ridicule, The Highlander instinctively griped beneath the folds of his plaid. "But it's better not," he said in his own language. "100 curses on the swine-eaters, who know neither decency nor civility. Make room, the pack of you," he said, advancing to the door. But his former friend interposed his sturdy bulk and opposed his leaving the house, and when Robin Oig attempted to make his way by force, he hit him down on the floor with as much ease as a boy bowls down a ninepin. A ring," was now shouted, until the dark rafters and the hams that hung on them trembled again, and the very platters on the bink clattered against each other. "Well done, Harry. Give it him home, Harry. Take care of him now. He sees his own blood." Such were the exclamations, while the Highlander, starting from the ground, all his coldness and caution lost in frantic rage, sprung at his antagonist with the fury, the activity, and the vindictive purpose of an incensed tiger-cat. But when could rage encounter science and temper? Robin Oig again went down in the unequal contest, and as the blow was necessarily a severe one, he lay motionless on the floor of the kitchen. The landlady ran to offer some aid, but Mr. Fleecebumpkin would not permit her to approach. "Let him alone," he said. "He will come to within time, and come up to the scratch again. He has not got half his broth yet. He has got all I mean to give him, though," said his antagonist, whose heart began to relent towards his old associate. "And I would rather by half give the rest to yourself, Mr. Fleecebumpkin, for you pretend to know a thing or two." And Robin had not art enough even to peel before setting to, but fought with his plaid dangling about him. "Stand up, Robin, my man, all friends now, and let me hear the man that will speak a word against you, or your country, for your sake." Robin Oig was still under the dominion of his passion, and eager to renew the onset, but being withheld on the one side by the peacemaking Dame Heskett, and on the other, aware that Wakefield no longer meant to renew the combat, his fury sunk into gloomy sullenness. Come, never grudge so much at it, man," said the brave, spirited Englishman, with the placability of his country. "Shake hands, and we will be better friends than ever." "Friends!" exclaimed Robin Oig with strong emphasis. "Friends! Never! Look to yourself, Harry Wakefield. Then the curse of Cromwell on your proud Scots stomach, as the man says in the play, and you may do your worst, and be D. For one man can say nothing more to another after a tussle than that he is sorry for it." On these terms the friends parted. Robin Oig drew out, in silence, a piece of money, threw it on the table, and then left the alehouse. But, turning at the door, he shook his hand at Wakefield, pointing with his forefinger upwards, in a manner which might imply either a threat or a caution. He then disappeared in the moonlight. Some words passed after his departure between the bailiff, who piqued himself on being a little of a bully, and Harry Wakefield, who, with generous inconsistency, was now not indisposed to begin a new combat in defence of Robin Oig's reputation. Although he could not use his daddies like an Englishman, as it did not come natural to him. But Dame Heskett prevented this second quarrel from coming to a head by her peremptory interference. "There should be no more fighting in her house," she said. There had been too much already. "And you, Mr. Wakefield, may live to learn," she added, "what it is to make a deadly enemy out of a good friend." "Sure, Dame, Robin Oig is an honest fellow, and will never keep malice. Do not trust to that. You do not know the dour temper of the Scots, though you have dealt with them so often. I have a right to know them, my mother being a Scot." "And so is well seen on her daughter," said Ralph Heskett. This nuptial sarcasm gave the discourse another turn. Fresh customers entered the tap-room or kitchen, and others left it. The conversation turned on the expected markets, and the reports of prices from different parts both of Scotland and England. Treaties were commenced, and Harry Wakefield was lucky enough to find a chap for a part of his drove, and at a very considerable profit, an event of consequence more than sufficient to blot out all remembrances of the unpleasant scuffle in the earlier part of the day. But there remained one party from whose mind that recollection could not have been wiped away by the possession of every head of cattle betwixt Esk and Eden. This was Robin Oig Mokombich. "That I should have had no weapon," he said, "and for the first time in my life. Blighted be the tongue that bids the Highlander part with the dirk. The dirk, hey! The English blood." My Muchmi's word wended her word fall to the ground. The recollection of the fatal prophecy confirmed the deadly intention which instantly sprang up in his mind. Ha! Morrison cannot be many miles behind, and if it were 100, what then? His impetuous spirit had now a fixed purpose and motive of action, and he turned the light foot of his country towards the wilds, through which he knew, by Mr. Ireby's report, that Morrison was advancing. His mind was wholly engrossed by the sense of injury sustained from a friend, and by the desire of vengeance on one whom he now accounted his most bitter enemy. The treasured ideas of self-importance and self-opinion of ideal birth and quality had become more precious to him, like the hoard to the miser, because he could only enjoy them in secret. But that hoard was pillaged. The idols which he had secretly worshipped had been desecrated and profane. Insulted, abused, and beaten, he was no longer worthy, in his own opinion, of the name he bore, or the lineage which he belonged to. Nothing was left to him. Nothing but revenge, and, as the reflection added a galling spur to every step, he determined it should be as sudden and signal as the offence. When Robin Oig left the door of the alehouse, 7 or 8 English miles at least lay betwixt Morrison and him. The advance of the former was slow, limited by the sluggish pace of his cattle. The last left behind him stubble field and hedgerow, crag and dark heath, all glittering with frost rime in the broad November moonlight at the rate of 6 miles an hour. And now the distant lowing of Morrison's cattle is heard, and now they are seen creeping like moles in size and slowness of motion on the broad face of the moor, and now he meets them, passes them, and stops their conductor. "May good betide us," said the Southlander. "Is this you, Robin Mokombich, or your wraith?" "It is Robin Oig Mokombich," answered the Highlander. "And it is not. But never mind that. Put be giving me the skein, do." "What, you are for back to the Highlands? The devil! Have yon selt all off before the fair? This beats all for quick markets. I have not sold. I am not going north. Maybe. I will never go north again. Give me pack my dirk, Hugh Morrison, or there will be words between us. Indeed, Robin, I'll be better advised before I gie it back to you. It is a wanchancy weapon in a Highlandman's hand, and I am thinking you will be about some barns breaking." "Prut, trut, let me have my weapon," said Robin Oig impatiently. "Hooly and fairly," said his well-meaning friend. "I'll tell you what will do better than these dirking doings. Ye ken Highlander, and Lowlander, and Bordermen are man's bairns when you are over the Scots dyke. See, the Eskdale callants, and Fighting Charlie of Liddesdale, and the Lockerbie lads, and the 4 dandies of Lustuther, and a ween mare grey plaids are coming up behind, and if you are ranged, there is the hand of a manly Morrison. We'll see you righted. If Carlisle and Stanwix Baith took up the feud." "To tell you the truth," said Robin Oig, desirous of eluding the suspicions of his friend, "I have enlisted with a party of the Black Watch, and must march off tomorrow morning." "Enlisted? Were you mad or drunk? You must buy yourself off. I can lend you 20 notes, and 20 to that, if the drove sell." "I thank you, Hughie, but I go with goodwill the gate that I am going." "So, the dirk, the dirk! There it is for you then, since less wunna serve. But think on what I was saying. Ways me, it will be sair news in the braes of Balquhidder that Robin Oig Maccombich should have run an ill gate and tarn on. Ill news in Balquhidder indeed, echoed poor Robin. But cot speed you, Hughie, and send you good markats. Ye winna meet with Robin Oig again, either at trysta or fair. So saying, he shook hastily the hand of his acquaintance, and set out in the direction from which he had advanced, with the spirit of his former pace. There is something wrang with the lad, muttered the Morrison to himself. But we will, maybe, see better into it the morn's morning. But long ere the morning dawned, the catastrophe of our tale had taken place. It was 2 hours after the affray had happened, and it was totally forgotten by almost everyone, when Robin Oig returned to Heskett's Inn. The place was filled at once by various sorts of men, and with noises corresponding to their character. There were the grave, low sounds of men engaged in busy traffic, with the tough, the song, and the riotous jest of those who had nothing to do but to enjoy themselves. Among the last was Harry Wakefield, who, amidst a grinning group of smock-frocks, hobnailed shoes, and jolly English physiognomies, was trolling forth the old ditty. What though my name be Roger, who drives the plough and cart? When he was interrupted by a well-known voice, saying in a high and stern voice, marked by the sharp Highland accent, Harry Wakefield, if you be a man, stand up. What is the matter? What is it? The guests demanded of each other. It is only a D, Scotsman, said Fleece Bumpkin, who was by this time very drunk, whom Harry Wakefield helped to his broth today, who is now come to have his cold Kylehet again. Harry Wakefield, repeated the same ominous summons, stand up, if you be a man. There is something in the tone of deep and concentrated passion which attracts attention and imposes awe, even by the very sound. The guests shrunk back on every side, and gazed at the Highlander as he stood in the middle of them, his brows bent and his features rigid with resolution. I will stand up with all my heart, Robin, my boy, but it shall be to shake hands with you, and drink down all unkindness. It is not the fault of your heart, man, that you don't know how to clench your hands. By this time he stood opposite to his antagonist, his open and unsuspecting look strangely contrasted with the stern purpose which gleamed wild, dark, and vindictive in the eyes of the Highlander. 'Tis not thy fault, man, that, not having the luck to be an Englishman, thou canst not fight more than a schoolgirl. I can fight, answered Robin Oig, sternly but calmly, and you shall know it. You, Harry Wakefield, showed me today how the Saxon churls fight. I show you now how the Highland Douinier Wassel fights. He seconded the word with the action, and plunged the dagger, which he suddenly displayed, into the broad breast of the English yeoman, with such fatal certainty and force that the hilt made a hollow sound against the breastbone, and the double-edged point split the very heart of his victim. Harry Wakefield fell, and expired with a single groan. His assassin next seized the bailiff by the collar, and offered the bloody poniard to his throat, whilst dread and surprise rendered the man incapable of defence. "It were very just to lay you beside him," he said, "but the blood of a base pickthank shall never mix on my father's dirk with that of a brave man." As he spoke, he cast the man from him with so much force that he fell on the floor, while Robin, with his other hand, threw the fatal weapon into the blazing turf fire. "There," he said, "take me who likes, and let fire cleanse blood if it can." The cause of astonishment still continuing, Robin Oig asked for a peace officer, and a constable having stepped out, he surrendered himself to his custody. "A bloody night's work you have made of it," said the constable. "Your own fault," said the Highlander. Had you kept his hands off me 2 hours since, he would have been now as well, and merry as he was 2 minutes since." "It must be sorely answered," said the peace officer. "Never you mind that. Death pays all debts. It will pay that too." The horror of the bystanders began now to give way to indignation, and the sight of a favourite companion murdered in the midst of them, the provocation being, in their opinion, so utterly inadequate to the excess of vengeance, might have induced them to kill the perpetrator of the deed even upon the very spot. The constable, however, did his duty on this occasion, and, with the assistance of some of the more reasonable persons present, procured horses to guard the prisoner to Carlisle, to abide his doom at the next assizes. While the escort was preparing, the prisoner neither expressed the least interest nor attempted the slightest reply. Only, before he was carried from the fatal apartment, he desired to look at the dead body, which, raised from the floor, had been deposited upon the large table, at the head of which Harry Wakefield had presided but a few minutes before, full of life, vigour, and animation, until the surgeon should examine the mortal wound. The face of the corpse was decently covered with a napkin, to the surprise and horror of the bystanders, which displayed itself in a general "Ah!" Drawn through clenched teeth and half-shut lips, Robin Oig removed the cloth and gazed with a mournful but steady eye on the lifeless visage, which had been so lately animated, that the smile of good-humoured confidence in his own strength, of conciliation at once and contempt towards his enemy, still curled his lip, while those present expected that the wound, which had so lately flooded the apartment with gore, would send forth fresh streams at the touch of the homicide. Robin Oig replaced the covering with the brief exclamation, "He was a pretty man. My story is nearly ended." The unfortunate Highlander stood his trial at Carlisle. I was myself present, and as a young Scottish lawyer, or barrister at least, and reputed a man of some quality, the politeness of the Sheriff of Cumberland offered me a place on the bench. The facts of the case were proved in the manner I have related them, and, whatever might be at first the prejudice of the audience against a crime so un-English as that of assassination from revenge, yet when the rooted national prejudices of the prisoner had been explained, which made him consider himself as stained with indelible dishonour when subjected to personal violence, when his previous patience, moderation, and endurance were considered, the generosity of the English audience was inclined to regard his crime as the wayward aberration of a false idea of honour, rather than as flowing from a heart naturally savage, or perverted by habitual vice. I shall never forget the charge of the venerable judge to the jury, although not at that time liable to be much affected either by that which was eloquent or pathetic. "We have had," he said, "in the previous part of our duty," alluding to some former trials, "to discuss crimes which infer disgust and abhorrence, while they call down the well-merited vengeance of the law. It is now our still more melancholy task to apply its salutary, though severe enactments to a case of a very singular character, in which the crime, for a crime it is, and a deep one, arose less out of the malevolence of the heart than the error of the understanding, less from any idea of committing wrong than from an unhappily perverted notion of that which is right. Here we have two men, highly esteemed, it has been stated, in their rank of life, and attached, it seems, to each other as friends, one of whose lives has been already sacrificed to a punctilio, and the other is about to prove the vengeance of the offended laws, and yet both may claim our commiseration at least, as men acting in ignorance of each other's national prejudices, and unhappily misguided rather than voluntarily erring from the path of right conduct. In the original cause of the misunderstanding, we must in justice give the right to the prisoner at the bar. He had acquired possession of the enclosure, which was the object of competition, by a legal contract with the proprietor, Mr. Ireby, and yet, when accosted with reproaches undeserved in themselves, and galling doubtless to a temper at least sufficiently susceptible of passion, he offered notwithstanding to yield up half his acquisition for the sake of peace and good neighbourhood, and his amicable proposal was rejected with scorn. Then follows the scene at Mr. Steen. Hesketh the publican's, and you will observe how the stranger was treated by the deceased, and, I am sorry to observe, by those around, who seem to have urged him in a manner which was aggravating in the highest degree, while he asked for peace and for composition, and offered submission to a magistrate, or to a mutual arbiter. The prisoner was insulted by a whole company, who seem on this occasion to have forgotten the national maxim of fair play. And while attempting to escape from the place in peace, he was intercepted, struck down, and beaten to the effusion of his blood. Gentlemen of the jury! It was with some impatience that I heard my learned brother, who opened the case for the Crown, give an unfavourable turn to the prisoner's conduct on this occasion. He said the prisoner was afraid to encounter his antagonist in fair fight, or to submit to the laws of the ring, and that, therefore, like a cowardly Italian, he had recourse to his fatal stiletto to murder the man whom he dared not meet in manly encounter. I observed the prisoner shrink from this part of the accusation with the abhorrence natural to a brave man, and as I would wish to make my words impressive when I point his real crime, I must secure his opinion of my impartiality by rebutting everything that seems to me a false accusation. There can be no doubt that the prisoner is a man of resolution, too much resolution. I wish to heaven that he had less, or rather that he had had a better education to regulate it. Gentlemen, as to the laws my brother talks of, they may be known in the bull-ring, or the bear garden, or the cockpit, but they are not known here, or, if they should be so far admitted, as furnishing a species of proof that no malice was intended in this sort of combat, from which fatal accidents do sometimes arise, it can only be so admitted when both parties are in part casu, equally acquainted with, and equally willing to refer themselves to, that species of arbitrament. But will it be contended that a man of superior rank and education is to be subjected, or is obliged to subject himself to this coarse and brutal strife, perhaps in opposition to a younger, stronger, or more skilful opponent? Certainly even the pugilistic code, if founded upon the fair play of merry old England, as my brother alleges it to be, can contain nothing so preposterous. And, gentlemen of the jury, if the laws would support an English gentleman wearing, we will suppose, his sword, in defending himself by force against a violent personal aggression of the nature offered to this prisoner, they will not less protect a foreigner and a stranger, involved in the same unpleasing circumstances. If, therefore, gentlemen of the jury, when thus pressed by a vis major, the object of obloquy to a whole company, and of direct violence from one at least, and, as he might reasonably apprehend, from more, the panel had produced the weapon which his countrymen, as we are informed, generally carry about their persons, and the same unhappy circumstance had ensued, which you have heard detailed in evidence, I could not in my conscience have asked from you a verdict of murder. The prisoner's personal defence might indeed, even in that case, have gone more or less beyond the moderamen inculpatae tutela, spoken of by lawyers, but the punishment incurred would have been that of manslaughter, not of murder. I beg leave to add that I should have thought this milder species of charge was demanded in the case supposed, notwithstanding the statute of James I cap, which takes the case of slaughter by stabbing with a short weapon, even without malice, prepense, out of the benefit of clergy. For this statute of stabbing, as it is termed, arose out of a temporary cause, and as the real guilt is the same, whether the slaughter be committed by the dagger or by sword or pistol. The benignity of the modern law places them all on the same, or nearly the same, footing. But, gentlemen of the jury, the pinch of the case lies in the interval of 2 hours interposed betwixt the reception of the injury and the fatal retaliation. In the heat of affray and chardmelée, law, compassionating the infirmities of humanity, makes allowance for the passions which rule such a stormy moment, for the sense of present pain, for the apprehension of further injury, for the difficulty of ascertaining, with due accuracy, the precise degree of violence which is necessary to protect the person of the individual, without annoying or injuring the assailant more than is absolutely necessary. But the time necessary to walk 12 miles, however speedily performed, was an interval sufficient for the prisoner to have recollected himself, and the violence with which he carried his purpose into effect, with so many circumstances of deliberate determination, could neither be induced by the passion of anger nor that of fear. It was the purpose and the act of predetermined revenge, for which law neither can, will, nor ought to have sympathy or allowance. It is true, we may repeat to ourselves, in alleviation of this poor man's unhappy action, that his case is a very peculiar one. The country which he inhabits was, in the days of many now alive, inaccessible to the laws, not only of England, which have not even yet penetrated thither, but to those to which our neighbours of Scotland are subjected, and which must be supposed to be, and no doubt actually are, founded upon the general principles of justice and equity which pervade every civilized country. Amongst their mountains, as among the North American Indians, the various tribes were wont to make war upon each other, so that each man was obliged to go armed for his own protection. These men, from the ideas which they entertained of their own descent and of their own consequence, regarded themselves as so many cavaliers or men-at-arms, rather than as the peasantry of a peaceful country. Those laws of the ring, as my brother terms them, were unknown to the race of warlike mountaineers. That decision of quarrels by no other weapons than those which nature has given every man must to them have seemed as vulgar and as preposterous as to the noblesse of France. Revenge, on the other hand, must have been as familiar to their habits of society as to those of the Cherokees or Mohawks. It is indeed, as described by Bacon, at bottom, a kind of wild, untutored justice, for the fear of retaliation must withhold the hands of the oppressor where there is no regular law to check daring violence. But though all this may be granted, and though we may allow that, such having been the case of the Highlands in the days of the prisoner's fathers, many of the opinions and sentiments must still continue to influence the present generation. It cannot and ought not, even in this most painful case, to alter the administration of the law, either in your hands, gentlemen of the jury, or in mine. The first object of civilization is to place the general protection of the law, equally administered, in the room of that wild justice which every man cut and carved for himself, according to the length of his sword and the strength of his arm. The law says to the subjects, with a voice only inferior to that of the deity, "Vengeance is mine." The instant that there is time for passion to cool and reason to interpose, an injured party must become aware that the law assumes the exclusive cognizance of the right and wrong betwixt the parties, and opposes her inviolable buckler to every attempt of the private party to right himself. I repeat that this unhappy man ought personally to be the object rather of our pity than our abhorrence, for he failed in his ignorance and from mistaken notions of honour. But his crime is not the less that of murder, gentlemen, and, in your high and important office, it is your duty so to find. Englishmen had their angry passions as well as Scots, and should this man's action remain unpunished, you may unsheath, under various pretences, 1,000 daggers betwixt the Land's End and the Orkneys. The venerable judge thus ended what, to judge by his apparent emotion and by the tears which filled his eyes, was really a painful task. The jury, according to his instructions, brought in a verdict of guilty, and Robin Oisin Combich, alias Gregor, was sentenced to death and left for execution, which took place accordingly. He met his fate with great firmness, and acknowledged the justice of his sentence, but he repelled indignantly the observations of those who accused him of attacking an unarmed man. "I give a life for the life I took," he said, "and what can I do more?" The name of my next master was, if Poe's bill, still more elegant and euphonious than that of my first. I now found myself body-servant to the Honourable Halganon Percy Duchies, youngest and fifth son of the Earl of Crabs. Halganon was a barrister, that is, he lived in Pump Court. Temple, a vulgar neighbourhood which perhaps my readers don't know. Sufis to say, it's on the confines of the city, and the Chuasan abode of the lawyers of this metropolis. When I say that Mr. Ducius was a barrister, I don't mean that he went sessions or surcoats, as they call 'em, but simply that he kept chambers, lived in Pump Court, and looked out for a commissionership, or a revisionship, or any other place that the Whig government could give him. His father was a Whig peer, as the Landress told me, and had been a Tory peer. The fact is, his lordship was so poor that he would be anything or nothing to get provisions for his sons, and an income for himself. I fancy that he allowed Halganon 200 a year, and it would have been a very comfortable maintenance, only he never paid him. However, the young Own was a Own, and no mistake. He got his allowance of nothing a year, and spent it in the most honourable and fashionable manner. He kept a cab, he went to Holmack's and Crockford's, he moved in the most exquisite circles and troubled the law, boozed very little, I can tell you. Those fashionable gents have ways of getting money, which common people don't understand. Though he only had a third floor in Pump Court, he lived as if he had the wealth of Cressus. The 10-pound notes flew about as common as halfpence. Claret and champagne was, at his house, as vulgar as gin, and very glad I was, to be sure, to be a valet to a scion of the nobility. Duces had in his sitting-room a large picture on a sheet of paper. The names of his family was wrote on it. It was wrote in the shape of a tree, a groin out of a man in armour's stomach, and the names were on little plates among the bows. The picture said that the Duciatius came into England in the year, along with William Conqueror's. My master called it his pedigree. I do believe it was because he had this picture, and because he was the Honourable Ducias, that he managed to live as he did. If he had been a common man, you'd have said he was no better than a swindler. It's only rank and buff that can warrant such singularities as my master showed, for it's no use disguising it. The Honourable Halganon was a gambler. For a man of vulgar family, it's the worst trade that can be for a man of common feelings of honesty. This profession is quite impossible, but for a real thoroughbred gentleman, it's the easiest and most profitable line he can take. It may, perhaps, appear curious that such a fashionable man should live in the Temple, but it must be recollected that it's not only lawyers who live in what's called the Inns of Court. Many bachelors who have nothing to do with law have here their lodgings, and many sham barristers, who never put on a wig and gown twice in their lives, keep apartments in the Temple, instead of Bond Street, Piccadilly, or other fashionable places. For instance, on our staircase, so these houses are called, there were sets of chamberses and only lawyers. These was bottom floor, Screwson, Hewson, and Jewson, attorneys, first floor, Mr. Sergeant Flabber opsite, Mr. Sergeant Flabber opsite, Councillor Bruffy, and second pair, Mr. Haggerstony, an Irish councillor, practising at the Old Bailey, and likewise what they call reporter to the Morning Post newspaper. Opsite him was wrote M.R. Richard Blewett, and on the third floor, with my master, lived one Mr. Dawkins. This young fellow was a newcomer into the temple, and unlucky it was for him too. He'd better have never been born, for it's my firm opinion that the temple ruined him. That is, with the help of my master and Mr. Dick Blewett, as you shall hear. Mr. Dawkins, as I was gave to understand by his young man, had just left the University of Oxford, and had a pretty little form of his own £6,000 or so in the stocks. He was just of age, an orphan who had lost his father and mother, and having distinguished himself at college, where he gained several prizes, was come to town to push his form, and study the barrister's business. Not being of a very high family himself, indeed, I've heard say his father was a chismonger, or something of that low sort. Dawkins was glad to find his old Oxford friend, Mr. Blewett, younger son to rich Squire Blewett of Leicestershire, and to take rooms so near him. Now, though there was a considerable intimacy between me and Mr. Blewett's gentleman, there was scarcely any betwixt our masters, mine being too much of the aristocracy to associate with one of Mr. Blewett's sort. Blewett was what they call a betting man. He went regular to Tattlesall's, kept a pony, wore a white hat, a blue bird's eye handkerchief, and a cutaway coat. In his manners he was the very contrary of my master, who was a slim, elegant man. As ever I see, he had very white hands, rather a sallow face with sharp dark eyes, and small whiskers neatly trimmed, and as black as Warren's jet. He spoke very low and soft. He seemed to be watching the person with whom he was in conversation, and always flattered everybody. As for Blewett, he was quite of another sort. He was always swearing, singing, and slapping people on the back, as hearty and as familiar as Poseville. He seemed a merry, careless, honest creature, whom one would trust with life and soul. So thought Dawkins at least, who, though a quiet young man, fond of his books, novels, Byron's poems, flute-playing, and such like scientific amusements, grew hand in glove with honest Dick Blewett, and soon after with my master, the Honourable Halgernon. Poor Daw! He thought he was making good connections, and real friends. He had fallen in with a couple of the most atrocious swindlers that ever lived. Before Mr. Dawkins's arrival in our house, Mr. Dawkins, Ducius, had barely condescended to speak to Mr. Blewett. It was only about a month after that circumstance that my master, all of a sudden, grew very friendly with him. The reason was pretty clear. Ducius wanted him. Dawkins had not been an hour in master's company before he knew that he had a pigeon to pluck. Blewett knew this too, and being very fond of pigeon, intended to keep this one entirely to himself. It was amusing to see the Honourable Halgernon manoeuvring to get this poor bird out of Blewett's claws, who thought he had it safe. In fact, he brought Dawkins to these chambers for that very purpose, thinking to have him under his eye and strip him at leisure. My master very soon found out what was Mr. Blewett's game. Gamblers know gamblers, if not by instinct, at least by reputation. And though Mr. Blewett moved in a much lower sphere than Mr. Ducius, they knew each other's dealings and characters perfectly well. "Charles, you scoundrel," says Ducius to me one day. He always spoke in that kind way. "Who Who is this person that has taken the opposite chambers and plays the flute so industriously? It's Mr. Dawkins, a rich young gentleman from Oxford, and a great friend of Mr. Blewett's, sir, says I. They seem to live in each other's rooms. Master said nothing, but he grinned my eye. How he did grin! Not the foul find himself could sneer more satanically. I knew what he meant, imprimish. A man who plays the flute is a simpleton. Secondly, Mr. Blewett is a rascal. Thirdmore, when a rascal and a simpleton is always together, and when the simpleton is rich, one knows pretty well what will come of it. I was but a lad in them days, but I knew what was what as well as my master. It's not gentlemen only that's up to snuff. Lor bless us, there was 4 of us on this staircase, 4 as nice young men as you ever see. Mr. Bruffy's young man, Mr. Dawkins's, Mr. Blewett's, and me, and we knew what our masters was about as well as they did theirselves. For instance, I can say this for myself, there wasn't a paper in Duceace's desk or drawer, not a bill, a note, or memorandum, which I hadn't read as well as he, with Blewett's. It was the same, me and his young man used to read 'em all. There wasn't a bottle of wine that we didn't get a glass, nor a pound of sugar that we didn't have some lumps of it. We had keys to all the cupboards we pipped into, all the letters that came and went. We pored over all the bill files, we'd the best pickings out of the dinners, the livers of the fowls, the force mit balls out of the soup, the eggs from the salad. As for the coals and candles, we left them to the landresses. You may call this roguery nonsense. It's only our right. A servant's perquisites is as sacred as the laws of England. Well, the long and short of it is this. Richard Blewett, Esquire, was situated as follows. He'd an income of 300 a year from his father. Out of this he had to pay 190 for money borrowed by him at college, 70 for chambers, 70 more for his horse, 80 for his servant on board Wigis, and about 350 for a suprat establishment in the Regency Park. Besides this, his pocket money, say 100, his eating, drinking, and wine merchant's bill, about 200 more. So that you see he laid by a pretty handsome sum at the end of the year. My master was different, and being a more fashionable man than Mr. B, in course, he owed a deal more money. There was fust, account contrary, at Crockford's, bills of exchange and IOUs up, but he didn't pay these in most cases, tailor's bills. In all hoss dealers do coach builder, bills contracted at Cambridge sundries. I give this as a curiosity. People don't know how, in many cases, fashionable life is carried on, and to know even what a real quorn LMNOs is something instructive and agreeable. But to my tale. The very day after my master had made the inquiries concerning Mr. Dawkins, which I have mentioned already, he met Mr. Blewett on the stairs, and beautiful it was to see how this nobleman, who had before been almost cut by my master, was now received by him. One of the sweetest smiles I ever saw was now visible on Mr. Duceace's countenance. He held out his hand, covered with a white kid glove, and said, in the most friendly tone of Vice Postbill, "What, Mr. Blewett? It is an age since we met. What a shame that such near neighbours should see each other so seldom." Mr. Blewett, who was standing at his door in a pea-green dressing-gown, smoking a cigar, and singing a hunting chorus, looked surprised, flattered, and then suspicious. "Why, yes," says he, "it is Mr. Ducey's a long time. Not, I think, since we dined at Sir George Hockey's. By the by, what an evening that was, hey, Mr. Blewett? What wine, what capital songs! I recollect your May Day in the morning. Cuss me, the best comic song I ever heard. I was speaking to the Duke of Doncaster about it only yesterday. You know the Duke, I think?" Mr. Blewett said quite surly. "No, I don't." "Not know him?" cries master. "Why, hang it, Blewett, he knows you, as every sporting man in England does, I should think. Why, man, your good things are in everybody's mouth at Newmarket." And so master went on, chaffing Mr. Blewett. That Jean man at fust answered him quite short and angry. But, after a little more flumery, he grew as pleased as Posebill, took in all Duciace's flattery, and believed all his lies. At last the door shut, and they both went into Mr. Blewett's chambers together. Of course I can't say what passed there, but in an hour master came up to his own room as yaller as mustard, and smelling sadly of 'bacco smoke. I never see any gongman more than he was. He'd been smoking cigars along with Blewett. I said nothing, in course, though I'd often heard him express his horror of 'bacco, and knew very well he would as soon swallow pizen as smoke. But he wasn't a chap to do a thing without a reason. If he'd been smoking, I warrant he had smoked to some purpose. I didn't hear the conversation between 'em, but Mr. Blewett's man did. It was, "Well, Mr. Blewett, what capital cigars! Have you one for a friend to smoke?" The old fox. It wasn't only the cigars, he was a-smoking. "Walk in," says Mr. Blewett, and then they began a chaffing together. Master very anxious about the young gentleman who had come to live in our chambers, Mr. Dawkins, and always coming back to that subject, saying that people on the same staircase ought to be friendly, how glad he'd be for his part to know Mr. Dick Blewett and any friend of his, and so on. Mr. Say, Dick, howsever, seemed quite aware of the trap laid for him. "I really don't know this Dawkins," says he. "He's a chismonger's son, I hear, and though I've exchanged visits with him, I don't intend to continue the acquaintance, not wishing to associate with that kind of people." So they went on, master fishing and Mr. fishing, Blewett not wishing to take the hook at no price. "Confound the vulgar thief," muttered my master as he was laying on his sofa, after being so very ill. "I've poisoned myself with his infernal tobacco, and he has foiled me. The cursed swindling boor! He thinks he'll ruin this poor cheesemonger, does he? I'll step in and warn him." I thought I should bust a-laughing when he talked in this style. I knew very well what his warning meant, locking the stable door but stealing the boss fust. Next day, his stratagem for becoming acquainted with Mr. Dawkins he executed, and very pretty it was. Besides pottery and the flute, Mr. Dawkins, I must tell you, had some other parsbalities whiz. He was very fond of good eating and drinking. After dawdling over his music and books all day, this young gentleman used to sally out of evenings, dine sumptuously at a tavern, drinking all sorts of wine along with his friend Mr. Blewett. He was a quiet young fellow enough at first, but it was Mr. B. who, for his own purposes, no doubt, had got him into this kind of life. Well, I needn't say that he who eats a fine dinner and drinks too much overnight wants a bottle of soda water, and a grill, perhaps, in the morning. Such was Mr. Dawkins's case, and reg'lar almost as 12 o'clock came, the waiter from Dick's coffee-house was to be seen on our staircase, bringing up Mr. D.'s hot breakfast. No man would have thought there was anything in such a trifling circumstance, master did, though, and pounced upon it like a cock on a barleycorn. He sent me out to Mr. Morell's, in Piccadilly, for what's called a Strasbourg pie in French, a pâté de foie gras. He takes a card, and nails it on the outside case. Pâté de foie gras come generally in a round wooden box like a drum, and what do you think he writes on it? Why, as follows: "For the Honourable Algernon, Percy Duciace, etc., 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 with Prince Talleyrand's compliments." Prince Talleyrand's compliments indeed. I laugh when I think of it still. The old serpent. He was a serpent. That Doucier, and no mistake. Well, by a most extraordinary piece of ill luck, the next day punctually, as Mr. Dawkins's breakfast was coming up the stairs, Mr. C.A. Halganon Percy Douciaf was going down. He was as gay as a lark, humming an opera tune and twisting round his head his heavy gold-headed cane. Down he went very fast, and by a most unlucky accident struck his cane against the waiter's tray, and away went Mr. Dawkins's grill, cayenne, ketchup, soda water, and all. I can't think how my master should have chose such an exact time, to be sure. His window looked upon the court, and he could see everyone who came into our door. As soon as the accident had took place, master was in such a rage as, to be sure, no man ever was in before. He swore at the waiter in the most dreadful way. He threatened him with his stick, and it was only when he see that the waiter was rather a bigger man than himself that he was in the least pacified. He returned to his own chambres, and John the waiter went off for more grill to Dix's coffee-house. "This is a most unlucky accident, to be sure, Charles," says master to me, after a few minutes' pause, during which he had been and wrote a note, put it into an envelope, and sealed it with his big seal of arms. "But stay, a thought strikes me. Take this note to Mr. Dawkins, and that pie you brought yesterday, and harkee, you scoundrel, if you say where you got it, I will break every bone in your skin." These kind of promises were among the few which I knew him to keep, and as I loved both my skin and my bones, I carried the note and, of course, said nothing. Waiting in Mr. Dawkins's chambers for a few minutes, I returned to my master with an answer. I may as well give both of these documents, of which I happen to have taken copies. I, the Hon. A. P. Doucias, to T. S. Dawkins, Esq. Temple, Tuesday. Mr. Doucias presents his compliments to Mr. Dawkins, and begs at the same time to offer his most sincere apologies and regrets for the accident which has just taken place. May Mr. Doucias be allowed to take a neighbour's privilege, and to remedy the evil he has occasioned to the best of his power? If Mr. Dawkins will do him the favour to partake of the contents of the accompanying case from Strasbourg direct, and the gift of a friend on whose taste as a gourmand Mr. Dawkins may rely, perhaps he will find that it is not a bad substitute for the plaque which Mr. Doucias's awkwardness destroyed. It will, also, Mr. Doucias is sure, be no small gratification to the original donor of the pâté when he learns that it has fallen into the hands of so celebrated a bon vivant as Mr. Dawkins. T.S. Dawkins, Esq., etc., 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 S. 2 from T.S. Dawkins, Esq. to the Hon. A. P. Doucias. Mr. Thomas Smith Dawkins presents his grateful compliments to the Hon. Mr. Doucias, and accepts with the greatest pleasure Mr. Doucias's generous proffer. It would be one of the happiest moments of Mr. Smith Dawkins's life if the Hon. Mr. L. Doucias would extend his generosity still further, and condescend to partake of the repast which his munificent politeness has furnished. Temple, Tuesday. Many and many a time, I say, have I grind over these letters, which I have wrote from the original by Mr. Bruffy's copying clerk. Doucias' flam about Prince Talleyrand was perfectly successful. I saw young Dawkins blush with delight as he read the note. He tore up 4 or 5 sheets before he composed the answer to it, which was as you read above, and wrote in a hand quite trembling with pleasure. If you could but have seen the look of triumph in Doucias's wicked black eyes when he read the note, I never see a dearman yet, but I can fancy a holding a writhing soul on his pitchfork and smiling like Doucias. He dressed himself in his very best clothes, And in he went, after sending me over to say that he would, accept with pleasure Mr. Dawkins's invite. The pie was cut up, and a most friendly conversation begun betwixt the two yeomen. Deuces was quite captivating. He spoke to Mr. Dawkins in the most respectful and flattering manner, agreed in everything he said, praised his taste, his furniture, his coat, his classic knowledge, and his playing on the flute. You'd have thought, to hear him, that such a polygon of excellence as Dawkins did not breath, that such a modest, sincere, honourable gentleman as Jussier was to be seen nowhere except in Pump Court. Poor Daw was completely taken in. My master said he'd introduce him to the Duke of Doncaster, and heaven knows how many knobs more, till Dawkins was quite intoxicated with pleasure. I know as a fact, and it pretty well shows the young gentleman's character, that he went that very day and ordered new coats on propos to be introduced to the Lord's Inn. But the best joke of all was at last. Singing, swaggering, and swarring upstairs came Mr. Dick Blewett. He flung open Mr. Dick Blewett, Dawkins's door, shouting out, "Daw, my old buck, how are you?" When all of a sudden he sees Mr. Deuceace, his jaw dropped. He turned chalky white and then burning red, and I looked as if a straw would knock him down. "My dear Mr. Blewett," says my master, smiling and offering his hand, "how glad I am to see you. Mr. Dawkins and I were just talking about your pony. Pray sit down." Blewett did, and now was the question, who should sit the other out, but, Lord bless you, Mr. Blewett was no match for my master. All the time he was fidgety, silent, and sulky. On the contrary, master was charmant. I never heard such a flow of conversating, or so many witticisms as he uttered. At last, completely beat, Mr. Blewett took his leave. That instant master followed him, and passing his arm through that of Mr. Dick, led him into our chambers, and began talking to him in the most affable and affectionate manner. But Dick was too angry to listen. At last, when master was telling him some long story about the Duke of Doncaster, Blewett burst out, "A plague on the Duke of Doncaster! Come, come, Mr. Deuceace, don't you be running your rigs upon me. I ain't the man to be bamboozled by long-winded stories about dukes and duchesses. You think I don't know you. Every man knows you, and your line of country. Yes, you're after young Dawkins there, and think to pluck him, but you shan't. No, by you shan't. The reader must recollect that the oaths which interspersed Mr. B.'s conversation I have left out. Well, after he'd fired a woolly of 'em, Mr. Shale, Deuceace spoke as cool and slow as possible. "Harkee, Blewett, I know you to be one of the most infernal thieves and scoundrels unhung. If you attempt to hector with me, I will cane you. If you want more, I'll shoot you. If you meddle between me and Dawkins, I will do both. I know your whole life, you miserable swindler and coward. I know you have already won £200 of this lad, and want all. I will have half, or you never shall have a penny." It's quite true that master knew things, but how was the wonder? I couldn't see Mr. B.'s face during this dialogue, being on the wrong side of the door. But there was a considerable pause after those compliments had passed between the two gentlemen, one walking quickly up and down the room, t'other, angry and stupid, sitting down and stamping with his foot. "Now listen to this, Mr. Blewett," continues master at last. "If you're quiet, you shall have half this fellow's money, but venture to win a shilling from him in my absence, or without my consent, and you do it at your peril." "Well, well, Mr. Deuceace," cries Dick, "it's very hard, and, I must say, not fair. The game was of my starting, and you've no right to interfere with my friend." "Mr. Blewett, you are a fool. You professed yesterday not to know this man, and I was obliged to find him out for myself. I should like to know by what law of honour I am bound to give him up to you." It was charmant to hear this pair of rascals talking about honour. I declare I could have found it in my heart to warn young Dawkins of the precious way in which these chaps were going to serve him. But if they didn't know what honour was, I did, and never, never did I tell tales about my masters when in their service out, in cause the obligation is no longer binding. Well, the next day there was a grand dinner at our chambers. White soup, turbot, and lobster sauce, saddle of Scotch mutton, grouse and mahoney, wines, champagne, hock, Madeira, a bottle of port, and ever so many of claret. The company present was three, viz., the Honourable A.P. Doucet, E.R. Blewett, and Mr. Dawkins, Esquires. My E. How we Mr. Blewett's man eats so much grouse when it was brought out of the parlour that I really thought he would be sick. Mr. Dawkins's gentleman, who was only about years of age, grew so ill with marony and plum pudding, so to be obliged to take several of Mr. D.'s pills, which one half killed him. But this is all promiscuous. I aren't talking of the servants now, but the masters. Would you believe it? After dinner, and perhaps bottles of wine between the gentlemen sat down to tea. It's a game where only plays, and where, in course, when there's only one looks on. First, they played crown pints, and a pound the bet. At this game they were wonderful equal, and about supper time when grilled ham, more champagne, devilled biscuits, and other things, was brought in. The play stood thus. Mr. Dawkins had £1, Mr. Blewett shillings, the Honourable, Mr. Doucet having lost times, as after the duel and the champagne, the play was a little higher. Now it was pound pints, and £5 the bet. I thought, to be sure, after hearing the compliments between Blewett and master in the morning, that now poor Dawkins's time was come. Not so. Dawkins won always, Mr. B betting on his play, and giving him the very best of advice. At the end of the evening, which was about 5 o'clock the next morning, they stopped. Master was counting up the score on a card. "Blewett," says he, "I've been unlucky. I owe you, let me see, yes, £45. "£45, says Blewett, and no mistake. "I will give you a cheque," says the Honourable gentleman. "Oh, don't mention it, my dear sir." But master got a great sheet of paper and drew him a cheque on Messrs. Pump, Algit and Co., his bankers. "Now," says master, "I've got to settle with you, my dear Mr. Dawkins. If you had backed your luck, I should have owed you a very handsome sum of money. Voyons, 13 points, at £1. It is easy to calculate," and, drawing out his puss, he clinked over the table golden sovereigns which shone till they made my eyes wink. So did poor Dawkins's, as he put out his hand, all trembling, and drew them in. "Let me say," added master, "let me say, and I've had some little experience, that you are the very best écarté player with whom I ever sat down." Dawkins's eyes glistened as he put the money up and said, "Lord, Doucet, you flatter me." Flatter him? I should think he did. It was the very thing which master meant. "But mind you, Dawkins," continued he, "I must have my revenge, for I'm ruined, positively ruined by your luck." "Well, well," says Mr. Thomas Smith Dawkins, as pleased as if he had gained £1,000,000. "Shall it be tomorrow? Blewett, what say you?" Mr. Blewett agreed in course. My master, after a little demurring, consented too. "We'll meet," says he, "at your chambers. But mind, my dear fellow, not too much wine. I can't stand it at any time, especially when I have to play écarté with you." Poor Dawkins left our rooms as happy as a prince. "Here, Charles," says he, and flung me a sovereign. Poor fellow! Poor fellow! I know what was a common. But the best of it was that these sovereigns which Dawkins won, master had borrowed them from Mr. Blewett. I brought 'em, with more, from that young gentleman's chambers that very morning, for, since his interview with master, Blewett had nothing to refuse him. Well, shall I continue the tale? If Mr. Stale, Dawkins had been the least bit wiser, it would have taken him 6 months before he lost his money. As it was, he was such a confounded ninny that it took him a very short time to part with it. Next day, it was Thursday, and master's acquaintance with Mr. Dawkins had only commenced on Tuesday. Mr. Dawkins, as I said, gave his party dinner at Mr. Blewett and the two Mr. D's as before. Play begins at do. This time I knew the business was pretty serious, for we servants was packed off to bed at o'clock. On Friday I went to chambers. No master he came in for minutes at about, made a little toilet, ordered more dews and soda water, and back again he went to Mr. Dawkins's. They had dinner thereat again, but nobody seemed to eat, for all the victuals came out to us gentlemen. They had in more wine, though, and must have drunk at least 24 in the hours. At 10 o'clock, however, on Friday night, back my master came to his chambers. I saw him as I never saw him before, namely, regular drunk. He staggered about the room, he danced, he hiccuped, he swore. He flung me a heap of silver, and, finally, he sunk down, exhausted on his bed. I pulling off his boots and close, and making him comfortable. When I had removed his garments, I did what it's the duty of every servant to do. I emptied his pockets, and looked at his pocket-book and all his letters. A number of accidents have been prevented that way. I found there, among a heap of things, the following pretty document. There was another bit of paper of the same kind, IOU. £400, Richard Blewett. But this, in cause, meant nothing. Next morning, at 9, master was up, and as sober as a judge. He dressed, and was off to Mr. Dawkins. At he ordered a cab, and the two gentlemen went together. Where shall he drive? Sir, says I. Oh, tell him to drive to the bank. Poor Dawkins, his eyes red with remorse and sleepless drunkenness, gave a shudder and a sob as he sunk back in the vehicle, and they drove on. That day he sold out every halfpenny he was worth, except £500. About master had returned, and Mr. Stair, Dick Blewett, came striding up the stairs with a solemn and important air. Is your master at home? Says he. Yes, sir, says I, and in he walks. I, in cause, with my ear to the keyhole, listening with all my might. Well, says Blewett, we made a pretty good night of it, Mr. Ducius. You've settled, I see, with Dawkins. Settled, says master. Oh, yes, I settled with him. 4,700, I think. About that, yes. That makes my share. Let me see, 2,350, which I'll thank you to fork out. Upon my word. Why, Mr. Blewett, says my master, I don't really understand what you mean. You don't know what I mean, says Blewett, in an accent such as I never before heard. You don't know what I mean. Did you not promise me that we were to go shares? Didn't I lend you 20 sovereigns the other night to pay our losings to Dawkins? Didn't you swear, on your honour as a gentleman, to give me half of all that might be won in this affair? Agreed, sir, says Ducias. Agreed. Well, sir, and now what have you to say? Why, that I don't intend to keep my promise. You infernal fool and ninny. Do you suppose I was labouring for you? Do you fancy I was going to the expense of giving a dinner to that jackass yonder, that you should profit by it? Get away, sir. Leave the room, sir. Or stop here. I will give you £400. Your own note of hand, sir, for that sum, if you will consent to forget all that has passed between us, and that you have never known Mr. Algernon Ducius. I've seen people angry before now, but never any like Blewett. He stormed, groaned, bellowed, swore. At last he fairly began blubbering, now cussing and gnashing his teeth, now praying dear Mr. Ducius to grant him mercy. At last master flung open the door. Heaven bless us! It's well I didn't tumble head over ears into the room, and said, Charles, show the gentleman downstairs. My master looked at him quite steady. Blewett slunk down, as miserable as any man I ever see. As for Dawkins, heaven knows where he was. Charles, says my master to me about an hour afterwards, I am going to Paris. You may come too, if you please. The Brothers. This tale is, in reality, founded on the beautiful tradition which belonged to Liebenstein and Sternfels. You must imagine then, dear Gertrude, said Trevelyan, a beautiful summer day, and by the same faculty that none possess so richly as yourself. For it is you who can kindle something of that divine spark even in me. You must rebuild those shattered towers in the pomp of old, raise the gallery and the hall, man, the battlements with warders, and give the proud banners of ancestral chivalry to wave upon the walls. But above, sloping half down the rock, you must fancy the hanging gardens of Liebenstein, fragrant with flowers, and basking in the noonday sun. On the greenest turf, underneath an oak, there sat 3 persons in the bloom of youth. 2 of the 3 were brothers. The third was an orphan girl, whom the lord of the opposite tower of Sternfels had bequeathed to the protection of his brother, the chief of Liebenstein. The castle itself, and the demesne that belonged to it, passed away from the female line and became the heritage of Otho, the orphan's cousin, and the younger of the 2 brothers now seated on the turf. And, oh, said the elder, whose name was Warbeck, you have twined a chaplet for my brother, have you not? Dearest Leoline, a simple flower for me? The beautiful orphan, for beautiful she was, Gertrude, as the heroine of the tale you bid me tell ought to be. Should she not have to? The dreams of my fancy, your lustrous hair, and your sweet smile, and your eyes of blue, that are never, never silent? Ah, pardon me, that in a former tale I denied the heroine the beauty of your face, and remember that, to atone for it, I endowed her with the beauty of your mind. The beautiful orphan blushed to her temples, and culling from the flowers in her lap the freshest of the roses, began weaving them into a wreath for Warbeck. It would be better, said the gay Otho, to make my sober brother a chaplet of the rue and cypress. The rose is much too bright a flower for so serious a night. Leoline held up her hand reprovingly. Let him laugh, dearest cousin, said Warbeck, gazing passionately on her changing cheek, and thou, Leoline, believe that the silent stream runs the deepest. At this moment they heard the voice of the old chief, their father, calling aloud for Leoline for ever. When he returned from the chase, he wanted her gentle presence, and the hall was solitary to him if the light sound of her step and the music of her voice were not heard in welcome. Leoline hastened to her guardian, and the brothers were left alone. Nothing could be more dissimilar than the features and the respective characters of Otho and Warbeck. Otho's countenance was flushed with the brown hues of health. His eyes were of the brightest hazel, his dark hair wreathed in short curls round his open and fearless brow. The jest ever echoed on his lips, and his step was bounding as the foot of the hunter of the Alps. Bold and light was his spirit, if at times he betrayed the haughty insolence of youth. He felt generously, and though not ever ready to confess sorrow for a fault, he was at least ready to brave peril for a friend. But Warbeck's frame, though of equal strength, was more slender in its proportions than that of his brother. The fair, long hair that characterized his northern race hung on either side of a countenance, calm and pale, and deeply impressed with thought, even to sadness. His features, more majestic and regular than Otho's, rarely varied in their expression. More resolute even than Otho, he was less impetuous, more impassioned. He was also less capricious. The brothers remained silent after Leoline had left them. Otho carelessly braced on his sword, that he had laid aside on the grass. But Warbeck gathered up the flowers that had been touched by the soft hand of Leoline and placed them in his bosom. The action disturbed Otho. He bit his lip and changed colour. At length he said, with a forced laugh, "It must be confessed, brother, that you carry your affection for our fair cousin to a degree that even relationship seems scarcely to warrant." "It is true," said Warbeck calmly. "I love her with a love surpassing that of blood." "How?" said Otho fiercely. "Do you dare to think of Leoline as a bride?" "Dare," repeated Warbeck, turning yet paler than his wonted hue. "Yes, I have said the word. Know, Warbeck, that I too love Leoline. I too claim her as my bride, and never, while I can wield a sword, never, while I wear the spurs of knighthood, will I render my claim to a living rival. Even," he added, sinking his voice, "though that rival be my brother." Warbeck answered not. His very soul seemed stunned. He gazed long and wistfully on his brother, and then, turning his face away, ascended the rock without uttering a single word. This silence startled Otho. Accustomed to vent every emotion of his own, he could not comprehend the forbearance of his brother. He knew his high and brave nature too well to imagine that it arose from fear. Might it not be contempt, or might he not, at this moment, intend to seek their father, and, the first to proclaim his love for the orphan, advance also the privilege of the elder born? As these suspicions flashed across him, the haughty Otho strode to his brother's side, and laying his hand on his arm, said, "Whither goes thou? And dost thou consent to surrender Leoline?" "Does she love thee, Otho?" answered Warbeck, breaking silence at last, and his voice spoke so deep an anguish that it arrested the passions of Otho even at their height. "It is thou who art now silent," continued Warbeck. "Speak, doth she love thee, and has her lip confessed it?" "I have believed that she loved me," faltered Otho. "But she is of maiden bearing, and her lip, at least, has never told it." "Enough," said Warbeck. "Release your hold." "Stay," said Otho, his suspicions returning. "Stay yet one word. Dost thou seek my father? He ever honoured thee more than me. Wilt thou own to him thy love, and insist on thy right of birth? By my soul and my hope of heaven, do it, and one of us two must fall." "Poor boy," answered Warbeck bitterly. "How little thou canst read the heart of one who loves truly. Thinkest thou I would wed her if she loved thee? Thinkest thou I could, even to be blessed myself, give her one moment's pain? Out on the thought away." "Then wilt not thou seek our father?" said Otho, abashed. "Our father!" "Has our father the keeping of Leoline's affection?" answered Warbeck, and shaking off his brother's grasp, he sought the way to the castle. As he entered the hall, he heard the voice of Leoline. She was singing to the old chief one of the simple ballads of the time that the warrior and the hunter loved to hear. He paused, lest he should break the spell, a spell stronger than a sorcerer's to him, and gazing upon Leoline's beautiful form, his heart sank within him. His brother and himself had each that day, as they sat in the gardens, given her a flower. His flower was the fresher and the rarer. His he saw not, but she wore his brother's in her bosom. The chief, lulled by the music and wearied with the toils of the chase, sank into sleep as the song ended, and Warbeck, coming forward, motioned to Leoline to follow him. He passed into a retired and solitary walk, and when they were a little distance from the castle, Warbeck turned round, and taking Leoline's hand, gently said, "Let us rest here for one moment, dearest cousin. I have much on my heart to say to thee." "And what is there?" answered Leoline, as they sat on a mossy bank, with the broad Rhine glancing below. "What is there that my kind Warbeck would ask of me?" "Aha! Would it might be some favour? Something in poor Leoline's power to grant. For ever from my birth you have been to me most tender, most kind. Yon, I have often heard them say, taught my first steps to walk. You formed my infant lips into language, and, in after years, when my wild cousin was far away in the forests at the chase, you would brave his gay jest and remain at home, lest Leoline should be weary in the solitude." "Ah, would I could repay you?" Warbeck turned away his cheek. His heart was very full, and it was some moments before he summoned courage to reply. "My fair cousin," said he, "those were happy days, but they were the days of childhood. New cares and new thoughts have now come on us. But I am still thy friend, Leoline, and still thou wilt confide in me thy young sorrows and thy young hopes as thou ever didst. Wilt thou not, Leoline?" "Canst thou ask me?" said Leoline, and Warbeck, gazing on her face, saw that though her eyes were full of tears, they yet looked steadily upon his, and he knew that she loved him only as a sister. He sighed, and paused again ere he resumed. "Enough," said he, "now to my task. Once on a time, dear cousin, there lived among these mountains a certain chief who had 2 sons, and an orphan like thyself dwelt also in his halls. And the elder son, but no matter, let us not waste words on him. The younger son, then, loved the orphan dearly, more dearly than cousins love, and fearful of refusal, he prayed the elder one to urge his suit to the orphan. Leoline, my tale is done. Canst thou not love Otho as he loves thee?" And now, lifting his eyes to Leoline, he saw that she trembled violently, and her cheek was covered with blushes. "Say," continued he, mastering himself, "is not that flower his present, a token that he is chiefly in thy thoughts? Ah, Warbeck, do not deem me ungrateful that I wear not yours also. But I—" "Hush," said Warbeck hastily, "I am but as thy brother. Is not Otho more? He is young, brave, and beautiful. God grant that he may deserve thee, if thou givest him so rich a gift as thy affections." "I saw less of Otho in my childhood," said Leoline evasively. "Therefore his kindness of late years seems stranger to me than thine." "And thou wilt not then reject him? Thou wilt be his bride?" "And thy sister," answered Leoline. "Bless thee, mine own dear cousin. One brother's kiss then, and farewell. Otho shall thank thee for himself." He kissed her forehead calmly, and, turning away, plunged into the thicket. Then, nor till then, he gave vent to such emotions as, had Leoline seen them, Otho's suit had been lost for ever, for passionately, deeply, as in her fond and innocent heart, she loved Otho. The happiness of Warbeck was not less dear to her. When the young knight had recovered his self-possession, he went in search of Otho. He found him alone in the wood, leaning with folded arms against a tree, and gazing moodily on the ground. Warbeck's noble heart was touched at his brother's dejection. "Cheer thee, Otho," said he. "I bring thee no bad tidings. I have seen Leoline, I have conversed with her. Nay, start not, she loves thee, she is thine." "Generous, generous Warbeck!" exclaimed Otho, and he threw himself on his brother's neck. "No, no," said he, "this must not be. Thou hast the elder claim. I resign her to thee. Forgive me my waywardness, brother. Forgive me." "Think of the past no more," said Warbeck. "The love of Leoline is an excuse for greater offences than thine. And now, be kind to her. Her nature is soft and keen. I know her well, for I have studied her faintest wish. Thou art hasty and quick of ire, but remember that a word wounds where love is deep. For my sake, as for hers, think more of her happiness than thine own. Now seek her. She waits to hear from thy lips the tale that sounded cold upon mine." With that, he left his brother, and, once more re-entering the castle, he went into the hall of his ancestors. His father still slept. He put his hand on his grey hair and blessed him, then stealing up to his chamber, he braced on his helm and armour, and thrice kissing the hilt of Fate's sword, said, with a flushed cheek, "Henceforth be thou my bride." Then, passing from the castle, he sped by the most solitary paths down the rock, gained the Rhine, and hailing one of the numerous fishermen of the river, won the opposite shore, and alone, but not sad, for his high heart supported him, and Leoline at least was happy, he hastened to Frankfurt. The town was all gaiety and life. Arms clanged at every corner, the sounds of martial music, the wave of banners, the glittering of plumed casques, the neighing of war steeds, all united to stir the blood and inflame the sense. St. Seine. Bertrand had lifted the sacred cross along the shores of the Rhine, and the streets of Frankfurt witnessed with what success. On that same day, Warbeck assumed the sacred badge, and was enlisted among the knights of the Emperor Conrad. We must suppose some time to have elapsed, and Otho and Leoline were not yet wedded, for, in the first fervour of his gratitude to his brother, Otho had proclaimed to his father and to Leoline the conquest Warbeck had obtained over himself, and Leoline, touched to the heart, would not consent that the wedding should take place immediately. "Let him, at least," said she, "not be insulted by a premature festivity, and give him time, amongst the lofty beauties he will gaze upon in a far country, to forget, Otho, that he once loved her who is the beloved of thee." The old chief applauded this delicacy, and even Otho, in the first flush of his feelings towards his brother, did not venture to oppose it. They settled, then, that the marriage should take place at the end of a year. Months rolled away, and an absent and moody gloom settled upon Otho's brow. In his excursions with his gay companions among the neighbouring towns, he heard of nothing but the glory of the Crusaders, of the homage paid to the heroes of the cross at the courts they visited, of the adventures of their life, and the exciting spirit that animated their war. In fact, neither minstrel nor priest suffered the theme to grow cold, and the fame of those who had gone forth to the holy strife gave at once emulation and discontent to the youths who remained behind. "And my brother enjoys this ardent and glorious life," said the impatient Otho, "while I, whose arm is as strong and whose heart is as bold, languish here, listening to the dull tales of a hoary sire and the silly songs of an orphan girl." His heart smote him at the last sentence, but he had already begun to weary of the gentle love of Leoline. Perhaps when he had no longer to gain a triumph over a rival, the excitement palled, or perhaps his proud spirit secretly chafed at being conquered by his brother in generosity, even when outshining him in the success of love. But poor Leoline, once taught that she was to consider Otho her betrothed, surrendered her heart entirely to his control. His wild spirit, his dark beauty, his daring valour, won while they awed her, and in the fitfulness of his nature were those perpetual springs of hope and fear that are the fountains of ever-agitated love. She saw with increasing grief the change that was growing over Otho's mind, nor did she divine the cause. "Surely I have not offended him," thought she. Among the companions of Otho was one who possessed a singular sway over him. He was a knight of that mysterious order of the Temple, which exercised at one time so great a command over the minds of men. A severe and dangerous wound in a brawl with an English knight had confined the Templar at Frankfurt and prevented his joining the crusade. During his slow recovery, he had formed an intimacy with Otho, and, taking up his residence at the castle of Liebenstein, had been struck with the beauty of Leoline. Prevented by his oath from marriage, he allowed himself a double license in love, and doubted not, could he disengage the young knight from his betrothed, that she would add a new conquest to the many he had already achieved. Artfully, therefore, he painted to Otho the various attractions of the holy cause, and, above all, he failed not to describe, with glowing colours, the beauties who, in the gorgeous East, distinguished with a prodigal favour the warriors of the cross. Dowries, unknown in the more sterile mountains of the Rhine, accompanied the hand of these beauteous maidens, and even a prince's daughter was not deemed, he said, too lofty a marriage for the heroes who might win kingdoms for themselves. "To me," said the Templar, "such hopes are eternally denied. But you, were you not already betrothed, what fortunes might await you?" By such discourses the ambition of Otho was perpetually aroused. They served to deepen his discontent at his present obscurity, and to convert to distaste the only solace it afforded in the innocence and affection of Leoline. One night, a minstrel sought shelter from the storm in the halls of Liebenstein. His visit was welcomed by the chief, and he repaid the hospitality he had received by the exercise of his art. He sang of the chase, and the gaunt hound started from the hearth. He sang of love, and Otho, forgetting his restless dreams, approached to Leoline, and laid himself at her feet. Louder then and louder rose the strain. The minstrel sang of war. He painted the feats of the Crusaders. He plunged into the thickest of the battle. The steed neighed, the trump sounded, and you might have heard the ringing of the steel. But when he came to signalize the names of the boldest knights, high among the loftiest sounded the name of Sir Warbeck of Liebenstein. Thrice had he saved the imperial banner. 2 chargers slain beneath him, he had covered their bodies with the fiercest of the foe. Gentle in the tent and terrible in the fray, the minstrel should forget his craft ere the Rhine should forget its hero. The chief started from his seat. Leoline clasped the minstrel's hand. "Speak. You have seen him. He lives. He is honoured. I myself am but just from Palestine, brave chief and noble maiden. I saw the gallant knight of Liebenstein at the right hand of the imperial Conrad, and he, lady, was the only knight whom admiration shone upon without envy, its shadow. Who then," continued the minstrel, once more striking his harp, "who then would remain inglorious in the hall? Shall not the banners of his sires reproach him as they wave? And shall not every voice from Palestine strike shame into his soul?" "Right," cried Otho suddenly, and flinging himself at the feet of his father. "Thou hearest what my brother has done, and thine aged eyes weep tears of joy. Shall I only dishonour thine old age with a rusted sword? No. Grant me, like my brother, to go forth with the heroes of the cross." "Noble youth," cried the harper, "therein speaks the soul of Sir Warbeck. Hear him, Sir Knight, hear the noble youth." "Heaven cries aloud in his voice," said the Templar solemnly. "My son, I cannot chide thine ardour," said the old chief, raising him with trembling hands. "But Leoline, thy betrothed?" Pale as a statue, with ears that doubted their sense as they drank in the cruel words of her lover, stood the orphan. She did not speak. She scarcely breathed. She sank into her seat and gazed upon the ground till, at the speech of the chief, both maiden pride and maiden tenderness restored her consciousness, and she said, "I, uncle, shall I bid Otho stay when his wishes bid him depart?" "He will return to thee, noble lady, covered with glory," said the harper. But Otho said no more. The touching voice of Leoline went to his soul. He resumed his seat in silence, and Leoline, going up to him, whispered gently, "Act as though I were not," and left the hall to commune with her heart and to weep alone. "I can wed her before I go," said Otho suddenly, as he sat that night in the Templar's chamber. "Why, that is true. And leave thy bride in the first week a hard trial? Better than incur the chance of never calling her mine, dear, kind, beloved Leoline. Assuredly, she deserves all from thee. And, indeed, it is no small sacrifice, at thy years and with thy mien, to renounce for ever all interest among the noble maidens thou wilt visit. Ah! From the galleries of Constantinople, what eyes will look down on thee, and what ears, learning that thou art Otho the bridegroom, will turn away, caring for thee no more? A bridegroom without a bride! Nay, man, much as the cross wants warriors, I am enough thy friend to tell thee, if thou weddest, to stay peaceably at home, and forget in the chase the labours of war from which thou wouldst strip the ambition of love." "I would I knew what were best," said Otho irresolutely. "My brother, ha! Shall he for ever excel me? But Leoline, how will she grieve, she who left him for me?" "Was that thy fault?" said the Templar gaily. "It may many times chance to thee again to be preferred to another. Troth, it is a sin under which the conscience may walk lightly enough. But sleep on it, Otho. My eyes grow heavy." The next day, Otho sought Leoline and proposed to her that their wedding should precede his parting. But so embarrassed was he, so divided between two wishes, that Leoline, offended, hurt, stung by his coldness, refused the proposal at once. She left him lest he should see her weep, and then she repented even of her just pride. But Otho, striving to appease his conscience with the belief that hers now was the sole fault, busied himself in preparations for his departure. Anxious to outshine his brother, he departed not as Warbeck, alone and unattended, but levying all the horse, men, and money that his domain of Sternfels, which he had not yet tenanted, would afford. He repaired to Frankfurt at the head of a glittering troop. The Templar, affecting a relapse, tarried behind, and promised to join him at that Constantinople of which he had so loudly boasted. Meanwhile, he devoted his whole powers of pleasing to console the unhappy orphan. The force of her simple love was, however, stronger than all his arts. In vain he insinuated doubts of Otho. She refused to hear them. In vain he poured with the softest accents into her ear the witchery of flattery and song. She turned heedlessly away, and only pained by the courtesies that had so little resemblance to Otho, she shut herself up in her chamber and pined in solitude for her forsaken. The Templar now resolved to attempt darker arts to obtain power over her, when, fortunately, he was summoned suddenly away by a mission from the Grand Master, of so high import that it could not be resisted by a passion stronger in his breast than love, the passion of ambition. He left the castle to its solitude, and Otho, peopling it no more with his gay companions, no solitude could be more unfrequently disturbed. Meanwhile, though, ever and anon, the fame of Warbeck reached their ears. It came unaccompanied with that of Otho. Of him they had no tidings, and thus the love of the tender orphan was kept alive by the perpetual restlessness of fear. At length the old chief died, and Leoline was left utterly alone. One evening, as she sat with her maidens in the hall, the ringing of a steed's hoofs was heard in the outer court, a horn sounded, the heavy gates were unbarred, and a knight of a stately mien and covered with the mantle of the cross entered the hall. He stopped for one moment at the entrance, as if overpowered by his emotion. In the next he had clasped Leoline to his breast. "Dost thou not recognize thy cousin Warbeck?" He doffed his casque, and she saw that majestic brow which, unlike Otho's, had never changed or been clouded in its aspect to her. "The war is suspended for the present," said he. "I learned my father's death, and I have returned home to hang up my banner in the hall and spend my days in peace." Time and the life of camps had worked their change upon Warbeck's face. The fair hair, deepened in its shade, was worn from the temples, and disclosed one scar that rather aided the beauty of a countenance that had always something high and martial in its character. But the calm it had once worn had settled down. Into sadness he conversed more rarely than before, and though he smiled not less often nor less kindly, the smile had more of thought, and the kindness had forgot its passion. He had apparently conquered a love that was so early crossed, but not that fidelity of remembrance which made Leoline dearer to him than all others, and forbade him to replace the images he had graven upon his soul. The orphan's lips trembled with the name of Otho, but a certain recollection stifled even her anxiety. Warbeck hastened to forestall her questions. "Otho was." "Well," he said, "and sojourning at Constantinople, he had lingered there so long that the crusade had terminated without his aid. Doubtless now he would speedily return. A month? A week? Nay, a day might restore him to her side." Leoline was inexpressibly consoled, yet something remained untold. Why so eager for the strife of the sacred tomb had he thus tarried at Constantinople? She wondered. She wearied conjecture, but she did not dare to search farther. The generous Warbeck concealed from her that Otho led a life of the most reckless and indolent dissipations, wasting his wealth in the pleasures of the Greek court, and only occupying his ambition with the wild schemes of founding a principality in those foreign climes, which the enterprises of the Norman adventurers had rendered so alluring to the knightly bandits of the age. The cousins resumed their old friendship, and Warbeck believed that it was friendship alone. They walked again among the gardens in which their childhood had strayed. They sat again on the green turf, whereon they had woven flowers. They looked down on the eternal mirror of the Rhine. Ah! Could it have reflected the same unawakened freshness of their life's early spring? The grave and contemplative mind of Warbeck had not been so contented with the honours of war, but that it had sought also those calmer sources of emotion which were yet found amongst the sages of the East. He had drunk at the fountain of the wisdom of those distant climes, and had acquired the habits of meditation which were indulged by those wiser tribes from which the Crusaders brought back to the north the knowledge that was destined to enlighten their posterity. Warbeck, therefore, had little in common with the ruder chiefs around. He did not summon them to his board, nor attend at their noisy wassails. Often late at night, in yon shattered tower, his lonely lamp shone still over the mighty stream, and his only relief to loneliness was in the presence and the song of his soft cousin. Months rolled on, when suddenly a vague and fearful rumour reached the castle of Liebenstein. Otho was returning home to the neighbouring tower of Sternfels, but not alone. He brought back with him a Greek bride of surprising beauty and dowered with almost regal wealth. Leoline was the first to discredit the rumour. Leoline was soon the only one who disbelieved. Bright in the summer noon flashed the array of horsemen, Far up the steep ascent wound the gorgeous cavalcade. The lonely towers of Liebenstein heard the echo of many a laugh and peal of merriment. Otho bore home his bride to the hall of Sternfels. That night there was a great banquet in Otho's castle. The lights shone from every casement, and music swelled loud and ceaselessly within. By the side of Otho, glittering with the prodigal jewels of the East, sat the Greek. Her dark locks, her flashing eye, the false colours of her complexion dazzled the eyes of her guests. On her left hand sat the Templar. "By the holy rood," quoth the Templar gaily, though he crossed himself as he spoke, "we shall scare the owls to-night on those grim towers of Liebenstein. Thy grave brother, Sir Otho, will have much to do to comfort his cousin when she sees what a gallant life she would have led with thee." "Poor damsel," said the Greek with affected pity, "doubtless she will now be reconciled to the rejected one. I hear he is a knight of a comely mien." "Peace," said Otho sternly, and quaffing a large goblet of wine. The Greek bit her lip and glanced meaningly at the Templar, who returned the glance. "Naught but a beauty such as thine can win my pardon," said Otho, turning to his bride, and gazing passionately in her face. The Greek smiled. Well sped the feast, the laugh deepened, the wine circled, when Otho's eye rested on a guest at the bottom of the board, whose figure was mantled from head to foot, and whose face was covered by a dark veil. "Beshrew me!" said he aloud. "But this is scarce courteous at our revel. Will the stranger vouchsafe to unmask?" These words turned all eyes to the figure, and they who sat next it perceived that it trembled violently. At length it rose, and walking slowly, but with grace, to the fair Greek, it laid beside her a wreath of flowers. "It is a simple gift, lady," said the stranger, in a voice of such sweetness that the rudest guest was touched by it. "But it is all I can offer, and the bride of Otho should not be without a gift at my hands. May ye both be happy." With these words, the stranger turned and passed from the hall silent as a shadow. "Bring back the stranger," cried the Greek, recovering her surprise. 20 guests sprang up to obey her mandate. "No, no!" said Otho, waving his hand impatiently. "Touch her not, heed her not, at your peril." The Greek bent over the flowers to conceal her anger, and from amongst them dropped the broken half of a ring. Otho recognized it at once. It was the broken half of that ring which he had broken with his betrothed. Alas, he required not such a sign to convince him that that figure, so full of ineffable grace, that touching voice, that simple action, so tender in its sentiment, that gift, that blessing, came only from the forsaken and forgiving Leoline. But Warbeck, alone in his solitary tower, paced to and fro with agitated steps. Deep, undying wrath at his brother's falsehood mingled with one burning, one delicious hope. He confessed now that he had deceived himself when he thought his passion was no more. Was there any longer a bar to his union with Leoline? In that delicacy which was breathed into him by his love, he had forborne to seek, or to offer her the insult of consolation. He felt that the shock should be borne alone, and yet he pined, he thirsted to throw himself at her feet. Nursing these contending thoughts, he was aroused by a knock at his door. He opened it. The passage was thronged by Leoline's maidens, pale, anxious, weeping. Leoline had left the castle with but one female attendant, none knew whither. They knew too soon. From the hall of Sternfels she had passed over in the dark and inclement night to the valley in which the convent of Bornhofen offered to the weary of spirit and the thee, broken of heart, a refuge at the shrine of God. At daybreak the next morning, Warbeck was at the convent's gate. He saw Leoline, What a change one night of suffering had made in that face, which was the fountain of all loveliness to him. He clasped her in his arms, he wept. He urged all that love could urge. He besought her to accept that heart which had never wronged her memory by a thought. "Oh, Leoline, didst thou not say once that these arms nursed thy childhood, that this voice soothed thine early sorrows? Ah, trust to them again and forever. From a love that forsook thee, turn to the love that never swerved." "No," said Leoline, "no. What would the chivalry of which thou art the boast? What would they say of thee? Wert thou to wed one affianced and deserted, who tarried years for another, and brought to thine arms only that heart which he had abandoned? No, and even if thou, as I know thou wouldst be, wert callous to such wrong of thy high name, shall I bring to thee a broken heart and bruised spirit? Shalt thou wed sorrow and not joy? And shall sighs that will not cease, and tears that may not be dried, be the only dowry of thy bride? Thou too, for whom all blessings should be ordained? No, forget me. Forget thy poor Leoline. She hath nothing but prayers for thee." "In vain," Warbeck pleaded. "In vain he urged all that passion and truth could urge. The springs of earthly love were forever dried up in the orphan's heart, and her resolution was immovable. She tore herself from his arms, and the gate of the convent creaked harshly on his ear. A new and stern emotion now wholly possessed him. Though naturally mild and gentle, he cherished anger, when once it was aroused with the strength of a calm mind. Leoline's tears, her sufferings, her wrongs, her uncomplaining spirit, the change already stamped upon her face, all cried aloud to him for vengeance. "She is an orphan," said he bitterly. "She hath none to protect, to redress her, save me alone. My father's charge over her forlorn youth descends of right to me. What matters it whether her forsaker be my brother? He is her foe. Hath he not crushed her heart? Hath he not consigned her to sorrow till the grave? And with what insult? No warning, no excuse. With lewd were sailors keeping revel for his new bridals in the hearing before the sight of his betrothed. Enough! The time hath come when, to use his own words, one of us two must fall." He half drew his sword as he spoke, and thrusting it back violently into the sheath, strode home to his solitary castle. The sound of steeds and of the hunting horn met him at his portal. The bridal train of Sternfels, all mirth and gladness, were parting for the chase. That evening, a knight in complete armour entered the banquet hall of Sternfels and defied Otho, on the part of Warbeck of Liebenstein, to mortal combat. Even the Templar was startled by so unnatural a challenge, but Otho, reddening, took up the gage, and the day and spot were fixed. Discontented, wroth with himself, a savage gladness seized him. He longed to wreak his desperate feelings even on his brother. Nor had he ever in his jealous heart forgiven that brother his virtues and his renown. At the appointed hour the brothers met as foes. Warbeck's visor was up, and all the settled sternness of his soul was stamped upon his brow. But Otho, more willing to brave the arm than to face the front of his brother, kept his visor down. The Templar stood by him with folded arms. It was a study in human passions to his mocking mind. Scarce had the first trump sounded to this dread conflict, when a new actor entered on the scene. The rumour of so unprecedented an event had not failed to reach the convent of Bornhofen, and now, 2 by 2, came the sisters of the holy shrine, and the armed men made way, as with trailing garments and veiled faces they swept along into the very lists. At that moment one from amongst them left her sisters with a slow, majestic pace, and paused not till she stood right between the brother foes. "Warbeck," she said in a hollow voice, that curdled up his dark spirit as it spoke. Is it thus thou wouldst prove thy love, and maintain thy trust over the fatherless orphan whom thy sire bequeathed to thy care? Shall I have murder on my soul?" At that question she paused, and those who heard it were struck dumb and shuddered. The murder of one man by the hand of his own brother! Away, Warbeck, I command. "Shall I forget thy wrongs, Leoline?" said Warbeck. "Wrongs! They united me to God. They are forgiven, they are no more. Earth has deserted me, but heaven hath taken me to its arms. Shall I murmur at the change? And thou, Otho," here her voice faltered, "thou, does thy conscience smite thee not? Wouldst thou atone for robbing me of hope by barring against me the future? Wretch that I should be, could I dream of mercy? Could I dream of comfort, if thy brother fell by thy sword in my cause? Otho, I have pardoned thee, and blessed thee and thine. Once, perhaps, thou didst love me. Remember how I loved thee. Cast down thine arms." Otho gazed at the veiled form before him. Where had the soft Leoline learned to command? He turned to his brother. He felt all that he had inflicted upon both, and casting his sword upon the ground, he knelt at the feet of Leoline and kissed her garment with a devotion that votary never lavished on a holier saint. The spell that lay over the warriors around was broken. There was one loud cry of congratulation and joy. "And thou, Warbeck?" said Leoline, turning to the spot where, still motionless and haughty, Warbeck stood. "Have I ever rebelled against thy will?" said he softly, and buried the point of his sword in the earth. "Yet, Leoline, yet," added he, looking at his kneeling brother, "yet art thou already better avenged than by this steel?" Thou art! Cried Otho, smiting his breast, and slowly, and scarce noting the crowd that fell back from his path, Warbeck left the lists. Leoline said no more. Her divine errand was fulfilled. She looked long and wistfully after the stately form of the Knight of Liebenstein, and then, with a slight sigh, she turned to Otho. "This is the last time we shall meet on earth. Peace be with us all." She then, with the same majestic and collected bearing, passed on towards the sisterhood, and as, in the same solemn procession, they glided back towards the convent, there was not a man present. No, not even the hardened Templar who would not, like Otho, have bent his knee to Leoline. Once more Otho plunged into the wild revelry of the age. His castle was thronged with guests, and night after night the lighted halls shone down thwart the tranquil Rhine. The beauty of the Greek, the wealth of Otho, the fame of the Templar, attracted all the chivalry from far and near. Never had the banks of the Rhine known so hospitable a lord as the Knight of Sternfels. Yet gloom seized him in the midst of gladness, and the revel was welcome only as the escape from remorse. The voice of scandal, however, soon began to mingle with that of envy at the pomp of Otho. The fair Greek, it was said, weary of her lord, lavished her smiles on others. The young and the fair were always most acceptable at the castle, and, above all, her guilty love for the Templar scarcely affected disguise. Otho alone appeared unconscious of the rumour, and though he had begun to neglect his bride, he relaxed not in his intimacy with the Templar. It was noon, and the Greek was sitting in her bower alone with her suspected lover. The rich perfumes of the East mingled with the fragrance of flowers, and various luxuries, unknown till then in those northern shores, gave a soft and effeminate character to the room. "I tell thee," said the Greek petulantly, "that he begins to suspect, that I have seen him watch thee, and mutter as he watched, and play with the hilt of his dagger. Better let us fly ere it is too late, for his vengeance would be terrible were it once aroused against us. Ah, Why did I ever forsake my own sweet land for these barbarous shores? There, love is not considered eternal, nor inconstancy a crime worthy death. Peace, pretty one, said the Templar carelessly. Thou knowest not the laws of our foolish chivalry. Thinkest thou I could fly from a knight's halls like a thief in the night? Why, verily, even the Red Cross would not cover such dishonour. If thou fearest that thy dull lord suspects, let us part. The Emperor hath sent to me from Frankfort, ere evening I might be on my way thither. And I left to brave the barbarians' revenge alone? Is this thy chivalry? Nay, prate not so wildly, answered the Templar. Surely, when the object of his suspicion is gone, thy woman's art and thy Greek wiles can easily allay the jealous fiend. Do I not know thee, Glycera? Why, thou wouldst fool all men save a Templar. And thou, cruel, wouldst thou leave me? Said the Greek, weeping. How shall I live without thee? The Templar laughed slightly. Can such eyes ever weep without a comforter? But farewell. I must not be found with thee. Tomorrow I depart for Frankfort. We shall meet again. As soon as the door closed on the Templar, the Greek rose, and pacing the room said, Selfish, selfish, how could I ever trust him? Yet I dare not brave Otho alone. Surely it was his step that disturbed us in our yesterday's interview. Nay, I will fly. I can never want a companion. She clapped her hands. A young page appeared. She threw herself on her seat and wept bitterly. The page approached, and love was mingled with his compassion. Why weepest thou, dearest lady? Said he. Is there aught in which Conrad's service is? Ah, thou hast read his heart. His devotion may avail. Otho had wandered out the whole day alone. His vassals had observed that his brow was more gloomy than its wont, for he usually concealed whatever might prey within. Some of the most confidential of his servitors he had conferred with, and the conference had deepened the shadow of his countenance. He returned at twilight. The Greek did not honour the repast with her presence. She was unwell and not to be disturbed. The gay Templar was the life of the board. Thou carriest a sad brow today, Sir Otho, said he. Good faith, thou hast caught it from the air of Liebenstein. I have something troubles me, answered Otho, forcing a smile, which I would fain impart to thy friendly bosom. The night is clear, and the moon is up. Let us forth alone into the garden. The Templar rose, and he forgot not to gird on his sword as he followed the knight. Otho led the way to one of the most distant terraces that overhung the Rhine. Sir Templar, said he, pausing, answer me one question on thy knightly honour. Was it thy step that left my lady's bower yester-eve at vesper? Startled by so sudden a query, the wily Templar faltered in his reply. The red blood mounted to Otho's brow. Nay, lie not, Sir Knight, these eyes, thanks to God, have not witnessed, but these ears have heard from others of my dishonour. As Otho spoke, the Templar's eye, resting on the water, perceived a boat rowing fast over the Rhine. The distance forbade him to see more than the outline of two figures within it. She was right, thought he. Perhaps that boat already bears her from the danger. Drawing himself up to the full height of his tall stature, the Templar replied haughtily, Sir Otho of Sternfels, if thou hast deigned to question thy vassals, obtain from them only an answer. It is not to contradict such minions that the knights of the temple pledge their word. Enough, cried Otho, losing patience, and striking the Templar with his clenched hand. Draw, traitor, draw! Alone in his lofty tower, Warbeck watched the night deepen over the heavens and communed mournfully with himself. To what end, thought he, have these strong affections, these capacities of love, this yearning after sympathy, been given me? Unloved and unknown I walk to my grave. and all the nobler mysteries of my heart are for ever to be untold." Thus musing, he heard not the challenge of the warder on the wall, or the unbarring of the gate below, or the tread of footsteps along the winding stair. The door was thrown suddenly open, and Otho stood before him. "Come," he said, in a low voice trembling with passion, "come, I will show thee that which shall glad thine heart." Twofold is Leoline avenged. Warbeck looked in amazement on a brother he had not met since they stood in arms, each against the other's life, and he now saw that the arm that Otho extended to him dripped with blood, trickling drop by drop upon the floor. "Come," said Otho, "follow me, it is my last prayer. Come, for Leoline's sake, come." At that name Warbeck hesitated no longer. He girded on his sword and followed his brother down the stairs and through the castle gate. The porter scarcely believed his eyes when he saw the two brothers, so long divided, go forth at that hour alone, and seemingly in friendship. Warbeck, arrived at that epoch in the feelings when nothing stuns, followed with silent steps the rapid strides of his brother. The two castles, as you are aware, are scarce a stone's throw from each other. In a few minutes, Otho paused at an open space in one of the terraces of Sternfels, on which the moon shone bright and steady. "Behold," he said in a ghastly voice, "behold!" And Warbeck saw on the sward the corpse of the Templar, bathed with the blood that even still poured fast and warm from his heart. "Hark!" said Otho. "He it was who first made me waver in my vows to Leoline. He persuaded me to wed yon whited falsehood. Hark! He who had thus wronged my real love, dishonoured me with my faithless bride, and thus, as, grinding his teeth, he spurned again and again the dead body of the Templar, thus Leoline and myself are avenged." "And thy wife?" said Warbeck pityingly. Fled with a hireling page, it is well. She was not worth the sword that was once belted on by Leoline. The tradition, dear Gertrude, proceeds to tell us that Otho, though often menaced by the rude justice of the day for the death of the Templar, defied and escaped the menace. On the very night of his revenge, a long and delirious illness seized him. The generous Warbeck forgot all, save that he had been once consecrated by Leoline's love. He tended him through his sickness, and when he recovered, Otho was an altered man. He forswore the comrades he had once courted, the revels he had once led. The halls of Sternfels were desolate as those of Liebenstein. The only companion Otho sought was Warbeck, and Warbeck bore with him. They had no topic in common, for one subject. Warbeck at least felt too deeply ever to trust himself to speak, yet did a strange and secret sympathy reunite them. They had at least a common sorrow. Often they were seen wandering together by the solitary banks of the river or amidst the woods, without apparently interchanging word or sign. Otho died first, and still in the prime of youth, and Warbeck was now left companionless. In vain the imperial court wooed him to its pleasures. In vain the camp proffered him the oblivion of renown. Ah! Could he tear himself from a spot where morning and night he could see afar, amidst the valley, the roof that sheltered Leoline, and on which every copse, every turf reminded him of former days? His solitary life, his midnight vigils, strange scrolls about his chamber, obtained him by degrees the repute of cultivating the darker arts, and shunning, he became shunned by all. But still, it was sweet to hear from time to time of the increasing sanctity of her in whom he had treasured up his last thoughts of earth. She it was who healed the sick, she it was who relieved the poor, and the superstition of that age brought pilgrims from afar to the altars that she served. Many years afterwards, a band of lawless robbers who ever and anon broke from their mountain fastnesses to pillage and to desolate the valleys of the Rhine, who spared neither sex nor age, neither tower nor hut, nor even the houses of God himself, laid waste the territories round Bornhofen, and demanded treasure from the convent. The abbess, of the bold lineage of Rudesheim, refused the sacrilegious demand. The convent was stormed, its vassals resisted, the robbers, inured to slaughter, won the day. Already the gates were forced, when a knight, at the head of a small but hardy troop, rushed down from the mountainside and turned the tide of the fray. Wherever his sword flashed, fell a foe. Wherever his war cry sounded, was a space of dead men in the thick of the battle. The fight was won, the convent saved. The abbess and the sisterhood came forth to bless their deliverer. Laid under an aged oak, he was bleeding fast to death. His head was bare, and his locks were grey, but scarcely yet with years. One only of the sisterhood recognized that majestic face. One bathed his parched lips, one held his dying hand, and in Leoline's presence passed away the faithful spirit of the last lord of Liebenstein. "Oh," said Gertrude through her tears, "surely you must have altered the facts. Surely it must have been impossible for Leoline, with a woman's heart, to have loved Otho more than Warbeck?" "My child," said Vane, "so think women when they read a tale of love, and see the whole heart bared before them. But not so act they in real life when they see only the surface of character, and pierce not its depths until it is too late."